Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
The head was telling. Nancy opened her eyes and for a long time could not realize where she was. Scant sunlight streamed into the room through the boarded-up window, and it smelled damp and musty. Nancy tried to get up, but found her arms and legs tightly bound with ropes, cutting painfully into her skin. God, what's happening? The girl thought. Where am I? The last thing she remembered was her and her husband celebrating their anniversary and drinking wine. She was pulled heavily into a dream. Frank carefully carried Nancy to the bedroom. And that was it. And now she was tied up in the middle of nowhere, completely helpless, and with no idea what had happened. And she's wiggling her ears, her lips. Somebody help her. The answer was absolute silence. She could only hear some birds flapping their wings and chickadees somewhere above the ceiling. Nancy tried to free herself from the ropes, but the knots were tight. With each movement, the slings only dug harder into her skin. The girl looked around for something to cut the ropes against. But there was nothing in the room except the filthy mattress she was lying on and a couple of boards in the corner. Shit! Nancy burst out. Slowly, she got up on her knees. She was still wearing the red silk dress she had been wearing yesterday. Her hair was tangled and stuck to her face. Yeah, I must look like a scarecrow. What is this place where Frank is? Looking around the room, the girl realized she was in some kind of abandoned house. The walls were covered in plaster, with brickwork peeking through. There was a thick layer of dust and debris on the floor. The remnants of wallpaper were covered with some kind of fungus. Nancy jerked suddenly, her gaze drawn to the window. It was quite high and boarded up, but through them Nancy saw something that could bring her salvation. Glass. There were large shards sticking out along the edge of the inner frame. The girl decided to get to one of them somehow by climbing to her feet. She tried to jump up to the window opening. The first attempt failed. After the first jump, the girl fell to the floor and hit herself painfully. Her legs were bleeding so badly that it seemed impossible to move. Nancy decided to crawl, overcoming her squeamishness, and the girl began to move slowly across the dirty floor towards the window. When she found herself against the wall, she stood up again. This time her legs proved more docile. The bottom edge of the window was at her eye level. The piece of glass was very close and not even blocked by a board, but there was no way for Nancy to reach it. Her hands were securely fastened behind her back. What to do? The girl muttered to herself, "If I can't get rid of the ropes soon, I'm finished." The one who brought me here, apparently, was guided by bad motives. I wasn't just left here to die, so he'll be here soon. I hope she took another good look around the room on her knees. She got into the corner with the boards. There were a couple big rusty nails sticking out of one of them. That's it, rejoiced the girl. The edges looked sharp. We should try to break the rope with them. She turned her back to the boards, sat down on the floor, and carefully began to run her bound hands over the protruding points. She cut her wrist painfully a couple times. The nails were rusty. But the least of Nancy's worries right now was possible infection. The rope had become wet with blood, but that didn't stop Nancy. She kept trying, ripping the cord at least a little bit. But the more she tried, the more it only hurt her skin. Suddenly, her attention was distracted by a knocking sound coming from behind the door. Was someone in the house? Fear and hope mixed in her found head. Not realizing who could be behind the door kidnapper or savior, the girl crawled back towards the mattress. She was about to try to scream for help when she suddenly heard a familiar voice. The speaker was behind the wall in the next room, and clearly he was not alone. To her horror, Nancy realized it was a man, her own husband. For a moment, the hope that had flared in her soul that Frank had come to save her crumbled. When she made out what she was saying, "You realize you can't leave her like this." Frank's voice sounded agitated. "Of course I understand," a rather low female voice answered him. Nancy did not recognize her husband's interlocutor. The house is abandoned, of course, but there's always the risk that someone might come here by chance. Not likely, though, especially since the building and the room are locked. Even if someone walks by, they won't break in. But what if that idiot comes to her senses and starts screaming for help? We can't take any chances. In fact, I suggest you get rid of her as soon as possible. I don't want any trouble, and neither do you. What do you suggest? Frank asked the stranger excitedly. That, my dear, is for you to decide. You're the brains of the operation. No, I'm not. Clara, you suggested all this. Oh, look at him talk. No, there's no turning back now. Or are you suggesting we just take her home and pretend it never happened? No, shouted Frank. I'm not stupid. I'm not going anywhere. I'm just consulting with you about a way. You realize that we have to do it cleanly so that no one will ever think it was an accident. And we don't have a lot of time. She'll be awake soon enough. And you're right, we can't keep her here forever. Better, on second thought, the woman replied. I have a couple options, but we need time. At least 24 hours. I got a guy I know who's a medical examiner there. We'll have to put your husband in the car and push him off the cliff. I'll get him to write the report. That's right. So what? It's an accident and everything. He knows. He does this kind of work from time to time. You can trust him. God forbid he flies first. I've got a lot of dirt on him. Clara, are you out of your mind? How do you know people like that? And how do you envision this accident? Very simple. Sleeping pills under the knot on the rocking manor driver's seat and parking lot in it, if you want to set fire to it. That for sure for the results of the autopsy, do not worry. The acquaintances will take care of it. All this is dangerous. After a long pause, Frank replied, and what other option to just leave it here? Let him starve to death. And you immediately reported to the police that the wife is missing? No, that won't do. They will find her sooner or later. And the suspicion? They'll understand me. They'll find something to catch me on. We'll work on the accident too, but we just have to be sure. Then we need to make sure no one can find her yet. Well, I'm getting everything ready. At least tape her mouth shut. Nice place you found, by the way. I didn't find a soul around here. The woman laughed suddenly. It has always been here. It's not mine, of course, but no one but me will enter it. Nancy could not believe that her husband's dialogue with this Clara was not a figment of her imagination. This couple is seriously discussing how to get rid of her. Who the hell is this girl? The girl was puzzled. Obviously, she and Frank have known each other for a while. They're planning this whole thing so calmly. And Frank, is he crazy? What did I do to them that they decided to get rid of me so radically? I've got to do something about this, or they'll put their plans into action. Just now, I'm like a mouse in a cage. The voices died down. Nancy nervously listened to the silence. Her heart pounded wildly, and frantically went over in her head the options to buy time. So this woman had said it would take her a couple days to get everything ready. Frank seemed to agree to that. So I might have time, but they're afraid I'll wake up and call for help. There were footsteps outside the door. Someone was about to enter the room. Suddenly, it hit Nancy. She would have a ghostly chance if she tried to play dead. Since she had fainted last night, her husband must have used some kind of drug to put her to sleep. It was possible to fake poisoning. The girl bit her tongue hard. After a couple seconds, her mouth filled with blood. She lay back on the mattress, tilting her head slightly to the side to let the blood flow from the corner of her mouth. For several years, Nancy had gone to yoga, where she had mastered breathing practices. One of them allowed her to put herself into a kind of trance by slowing her heart rate dramatically. It was going to work. The girl froze and began to take a series of deep breaths. A key turned in the keyhole. Nancy's eyes were closed, so she could not see who had entered the room. All her attention was now focused on her breathing. She took one last deep breath and froze. Thoughts were wandering somewhere outside of her mind. Clara entered the room and saw the girl lying motionless on the mattress. Looking closely at her, the woman noticed blood oozing from the corner of her mouth. No shit. Clara burst out. She walked over to Nancy and listened to her breathing. The girl wasn't breathing. Clara set her lip down. She reached up to her captive's neck and tried to feel for a pulse. It was absent, though the body was still warm. Clara shook Nancy by the shoulders, but she didn't react just fine. Hey, Frank, come here. Frank entered the room with a heavy gait. He looked around and didn't immediately realize why his friend had called him. "Honey," Clara said worriedly, "I don't even know whether we have one less or more problem now." "What do you mean?" The man was surprised. "Your spouse passed away. See for yourself." Frank's face showed confusion. "How could she die? Are you sure?" "Yes." Clara was quick to assure him. "Not breathing. No pulse, blood coming out of her mouth." "What did you give her last night?" "I gave her a horse dose before the sleeping pills. It shouldn't have been. Your fiancé must have some kind of individual intolerance." "But if you remember." "I don't remember anything," Frank argued resentfully. He looked at Nancy's breathless body. For a moment, it seemed to him that she had returned. He pushed Clara away and began to feel his wife's pulse himself, but there was no heartbeat. "What's there to check? Don't you believe me?" Clara was angry. "Obviously hell. Your little girl threw herself. That's it. At least it's easier for us not to get our hands dirty. Just put her in the driver's seat. It's a piece of cake. In the meantime, I think we can leave her here. She's not going to call for help, no matter how many bands she's got." Frank stood there paralyzed. Despite everything that had happened recently, he had once loved his wife dearly, and now to see her dead. Realizing he'd had a hand in it, it was wild. But Clara was right. The body could be left here for the time being without worrying about it being discovered so quickly. Frank shook himself out of his daze. "Okay, what do you say?" Quietly he answered Clara. "Let's at least cover it with something. Just to be safe." Clara went into the next room and brought out a couple of dirty cotton coats, tossing them carelessly on Nancy. She left the room. Frank took one last look at his dead wife and followed. Nancy heard a car pull away from the house. While her captors were in the house, she was afraid to even begin to breathe, let alone move. Her whole body ached unbearably. The wounds on her arms were badly posterior, though the blood had already stopped flowing. The cotton batting Clara had covered her with stank horribly. When Nancy took her first breath, she nearly vomited. As she struggled to get out from under them, she finally tried to regain her breath. Now she thanked God that she had decided to take up yoga and mastered this difficult breathing technique, slowing her heartbeat to a lower limit. If Frank and Clara had been a little more persistent, they would have waited for another heartbeat. But Nancy had been lucky. Either the kidnappers were scared, or they were just very willing to take the expected for granted. But now the girl had time on her hands. She remembered that a couple of scoundrels had mentioned near the house. Rarely, but still people showed up. "So I just had to stand under the window and watch for passersby." The problem was that from the high window there was nothing to see. And Nancy had no strength left to stand for hours waiting for rescue. She was unbearably thirsty, and the kidnappers had not even left her any water, for the corpse had no need of it. Nancy tried again to cut the ropes, but the long weave did not give in. Besides, the wounds started again. Abandoning these attempts, the girl tried to look at the problem from the other side. If it is not possible to break the ties, you can try and bend, and try to pull the hands forward. It was the wrists that were bound. Thanks to all that yoga, Nancy was quite flexible. She'd seen a couple of movies where characters had done such tricks, but she'd never tried it herself. Nancy strained her ligaments and twisted her joints as hard as she could. By some miracle, she succeeded. When the girl saw the bound hands in front of her, she cried with joy. Despite the fact that all the skin was covered with deep scratches and abrasions. Now the only thing left to do was to somehow try to untie the knot. Nancy tried to do it with her teeth, but the rope was synthetic, and the knot itself was too tight and tangled. Only now the girl realized why the nails were slipping so persistently. But she managed to free her legs. For some reason, they were not as securely fastened as the arms. Nancy experienced inexpressible relief when finally left her ankles. The rope was now covered with gruesome welts. Frank was probably the one who tied up his wife, not the least bit sorry for her when he intended to immobilize her, and pity me, Nancy reasoned. If they're going to send me to the other world, they certainly wouldn't think twice about a couple of bruises. The question is another. Why on earth would they intend to get rid of me? Nancy really didn't understand. With Frank, they had already been married for 6 years. There hadn't even been a single more or less serious quarrel in that time. Their only point of disagreement was that the girl didn't want to have children. At first, Frank thought that she was simply not ready. But during the 3 years of married life, he realized that Nancy was firm in her convictions. She didn't see herself as a mother at all. She didn't get a thrill from all kinds of cradles, rattles, strollers, and videos from the net with funny babies. And the sight of mothers walking their offspring in the yard caused disgust. Frank, on the other hand, dreamed of an heir. A couple of times there were conflicts, the right out of which always came out Nancy. She managed to convince the spouses in their views for a time he really accepted them. But some time passed, and Frank again raised the subject. He even tried to tamper with his wife's birth control pills. When Nancy found out about it, she didn't start a scandal. She just did. She went to the hospital and got an IUD inserted. There was nothing the husband could do about it. Gradually, the baby talk stopped. Frank just accepted that his wife was like that and hoped that one day the maternal instinct in her will still take over. But the girl doubted that the unwillingness to have children was the cause of the crime. It was much easier to divorce and find a suitable woman, or even take one with ready offspring. Especially Frank wouldn't have had any trouble with that. The guy was damn good-looking, educated, well-mannered, quite well-to-do. Such men, as she liked to say, found a friend Alice on the row is not lying. Could it be money? A year ago, Nancy became the owner of a huge fortune, inherited from her grandmother. When she learned that the last will of the deceased was to leave her only granddaughter a collection of paintings, she was not particularly happy. Classical painting she was not particularly interested in a few dozen canvases, and Hane especially nowhere was. Therefore, after consulting with Frank, Nancy decided to sell the paintings. The couple ordered an examination to at least roughly understand how much all this could cost, and were completely unprepared for the result of the evaluation. The most ordinary landscapes turned out to be unknown works by famous artists. Only the starting price of the collection at the auction was up to a couple of $100 million. It was even frightening to imagine how much the buyers would be willing to pay for it by the end of the auction. Nancy was shocked. Frank quickly realized that such a gift of fate could significantly improve the quality of their lives. One of the paintings was sold to a Chinese millionaire. There was no limit to the joy of the couple. The husband, delighted with the success, proposed to auction the entire collection. But Nancy, on reflection, declined. It seemed to her that in the painting's capital will be safely insured, and with such a demand for Russian painting for a few years will grow significantly in value. Frank seemed to accept her decision, but it was noticeable that he was upset. He could not wait to make a favorable deal and to do something more ambitious than to blow dust off the old paintings. But his wife was adamant. It seemed to her that the money received from the sale of one painting, quite enough for a comfortable life and any investment. She quietly gave the entire proceeds of Frank on his personal projects. The rest of the paintings went into a bank vault until better times. Nancy could not even imagine that this would push her husband into crime. In fact, the inheritance was her property. Frank had no rights to it. In the event of a divorce, he would get nothing. The death of his wife is another matter. He would have been the sole heir, and all problems would have been solved. But the other thing is more important. Who was this woman Clara? For all the time of their life together, the girl did not even allow the idea that her husband could have a mistress. Frank behaved as an exemplary husband, and everything indicated that he loved his wife, as well as she him. He tolerated her whims, even if they contradicted her views. He was never absent for long periods of time. Even with these paintings, he gave up easily enough. Had he only pretended, and already in his mind a plan had been born for Nancy to shake off these thoughts. So she said aloud, something had to be thought of right away. Those two could come back at any moment. There was no precious time to lose. Her bound hands were in the way, but the circulation in her legs was already fully restored. Nancy went to the door and held the handle. It was padlocked shut. The door looked pretty sturdy. Nancy, with her frail build and partial immobility, was not going to be able to kick it open. That left the window. The girl went to it, stood on tiptoe, looked through the gaps in the boards. In front of the house, there was a rather vast wasteland, piled with boards of wood from time and dampness. Next to the pile of rotting wood stood a rusty Soviet-style truck. Some kind of old bathtub filled with dark water. Nancy's gaze came upon a fence. It was wooden, but quite high. Where the boards were missing, you could see the road through them. As Nancy stood at the window, 2 cars passed by. She tried to call for help, but the road was too far away, and through the open window her voice was unlikely to penetrate the street. Nancy, powerless, sank to the floor. She was beginning to lose hope. Besides, she was tormented by an intense thirst. The girl realized that a little more and she would die a quite natural death of despair. Large tears rolled from her eyes. Without knowing it, Nancy fell asleep. She was awakened by a noise outside. Startled, the girl quickly jumped up and went to the window. There was someone walking around the house. It was already dusk outside, so she had to look for a long time, and the girl heard a man's voice. Who are the owners? Jesus. Nancy's heart was pounding. People, we have to get your attention right away. I'm here, shouted the girl with all her might, coming close to the window. Help. For God's sake, help. I'm inside. The man who was walking around the house apparently did not hear her. Nancy began pounding on the boards with her bound hands and kept calling for help. At some point, her cries got through. Woman, are you all right? The man's voice got louder. He must have realized where the sound was coming from, screaming at the top of Nancy's voice. I'm begging you, help me. The man walked straight to the window. The girl saw through the slits his face. It was a rather elderly man with glasses. He met Nancy's eyes. Girl, he began. Are you here alone? Are you in trouble? For God's sake, help me out. The house is locked and my hands are tied. You can try to break the door down. The front door is iron. I'm afraid it won't work. Isn't there another way in? I don't know. Nancy started crying. We have to hurry. They could come back at any moment. Who are they? Asked the stranger. It's a long story. Nancy interrupted him hurriedly. Please find a way to help me get out, or they will kill me. The man's face showed confusion. He could see that the girl was not joking. You just don't worry. He hastened to reassure Nancy. I'll get around now. The house will look for another entrance. The room I'm in is locked too. You can break the door. It's wooden. It opens inwards. The man stepped away from the window. Nancy was afraid he would leave her here, preferring not to get involved. She shouted after him not to leave, but the stranger was no longer visible from the window. Shit, the girl cursed to herself. If only he would come back, and then I'm saved. After a few minutes, the man came to the window again. The girl, he said. I went to the car to get a tire iron. There's another door on the other side of the house. There's a padlock on it. I'll try to break it off. Just don't worry, please. Okay, Nancy said and sank heavily to the floor. Soon she heard a metallic clanking sound. Apparently a man was trying to dislodge the lock. It took him a moment, after which he quickly reached the door. The handle lingered, and Nancy tore towards the entrance. I'm in here, again she shouted. Okay, step away from the door. I'll try to kick it open. Nancy obediently stepped farther away. It took the man a few blows before the door began to give way. After another minute, the man fell out into the room with a crash. Nancy shrieked, Are you all right? Concernedly, she asked the stranger as he, affected, rose from the wreckage. It's nothing. Soothed the girl. What happened to you? Why are you bound? I'll tell you everything. But I beg you, let's get out of here as soon as possible. All right, let's go, agreed the man. He saw the poor condition of his new acquaintance, so he saw no reason to delay. I have a car not far away. Can you walk? I think so, answered Nancy. Now she was ready even to run. There's just one little problem. What's that? Nancy's chest tightened. I have a flat tire. I thought I'd go to the owners and ask for a jack. There was a look of panic on the girl's face. When the man saw it, he hurried to reassure her. He saw that she was terrified at the thought of having to stay in this house. Don't worry, we'll just drive a little way and then we'll figure it out. They left the building and headed for the gate. Nancy saw the house from the side of the dilapidated and brick-building hollow ethereal roofs, an abandoned lot with scant vegetation. Half the yard was drowned in nettles. Broken glass and stakes, ceramic tiles were lying everywhere. "I wasn't sure if anyone lived here," the man explained as they walked along. "But there's no houses around here, just this one. And as luck would have it, I got a flat tire. Now we'll sit down, I'll give you a rope." The car was about 100 meters from the fence. It was a pretty decent SUV. The stranger helped Nancy into it. He pulled out a large hunting knife from somewhere and with confident movements cut the thick cord into one. His hands were in a terrible state, but nothing caused them now. "It would have to be treated. The cuts look pretty deep," he remarked. "Nonsense." The girl tried to smile. "Please, let's get out of here quickly." Then all that handling on a flat tire. It wasn't easy to drive. The driver tried to do it carefully. Luckily, after a couple of kilometers, they came to a gas station. "Got a jack." The man got a spare tire from the trunk and changed it quite quickly. "Oh, it's hard," he said, getting in the car. "The old tire's a goner, of course, but the rim's intact, so it's all right. So now tell me where to take you." "I live out of the way, hopefully in a classroom." "Where is she supposed to go exactly?" "She can't exactly go home. Frank's there with that horrible woman. Neither can she go to her acquaintances." Now the girl suspected everyone in general to the police, that she will say that her husband with an unknown woman and kidnapped her. And where's the proof? Seeing that the girl is confused, the man decided to take the initiative. So he began. "Let's start by introducing ourselves. My name is James," Nancy muttered, "and the girl is Nancy." James said thoughtfully, "What a rare name that is nowadays. That's what Nancy is. I think you're hungry. Let's go somewhere and you can tell me all about it." Nancy gladly agreed. She hadn't eaten in 24 hours. She was so thirsty that it was hard for her to speak. They stopped at a small roadside eatery. The girl immediately went to the restroom, leaving her companion to order at his discretion. She would eat an elephant right now. The restroom shone with whiteness. Nancy was even surprised. She thought places like this were unsanitary, and the tiles were scrawled with all sorts of obscene writings. She went to the mirror and was horrified at the absenteeism. Her face was in front of dried blood, her hair was tangled, mascara stains were visible under her eyes. The girl put her hands under a stream of cool water. The wounds immediately began to sting unbearably. She thoroughly washed everything with soap at Soap Her Face. Only now the girl realized that she was completely barefoot. The shoes she had been wearing the day before had been left in that horrible room. How could I go barefoot and not even notice? There was glass and rocks everywhere in the yard. It's called shock. She asked her reflection in the mirror. Thank God, there are almost no people. I don't look so bad. Nancy went out into the hall, where James was waiting for her. His order had already been brought to him. The girl hurriedly sat down at the table so that no one would see her bare feet. James, guilty, she began. I don't even know how to say it. I don't have any shoes. Really? Surprised man and looked under the table. You need to fix that right away. I have some old sneakers in my car. If you don't mind putting them on, let me get them now and then we'll go to the store and find something more suitable. A couple minutes later, he came back with a pair of teenage sneakers. Nancy immediately put their shoes on. They fit. My grandsons, the man explained, smiling. They bought him new ones, but he kept them. I'm an old school man. I was sorry to throw them away. I thought they might come in handy. As you can see, my instincts were right. Your instincts don't fail you in principle. If you hadn't been at that unfortunate house today, I dread to think what would have happened to me. And Nancy told James everything that had happened since last night. Yes, the man thought, there's no getting out of it. You realize you can't go home. Worse, they'll come back. They'll see that you're missing, and they'll start looking for you. They'll be driven by fear of exposure. And the intruders will realize that you won't go to the police because of the lack of evidence. What am I supposed to do? I can't even go to my best friend's house. Frank will look for me there first. I don't have any parents, only a grandmother, but she died a year ago. That's what James said, looking Nancy straight in the eye. I know my proposal will seem strange, since this is the first time you've seen me. But I can't leave you in the lurch. You can stay with me for a while, and I'll think of a way to bring your abusers to justice. You know they can't go unpunished, and you must go on with your life without fear of going out into the street." Nancy was visibly embarrassed. She was frightened not by the fact that she had to accept such a proposal from a stranger, but by the very fact that she would have to invade someone else's life so brazenly. "I can see your doubts, Nancy." James was quick to reassure her. "Don't worry, you won't be a burden to me at all. I have a big apartment. I live with my cat and my son. He recently divorced his wife. He's staying with me for now. He can't live alone. And Liam, my grandson, is safe to see. His wife, the former Cindy, lets him go to his grandfather's house without question. You'll get to know each other. It won't be boring. And my son is a smart guy. He'll help you understand your complicated situation. He used to work in the organs, but he left because he couldn't bear to see how the law actually works in our country. He had a keen sense of justice that was shattered by the bureaucracy. James, thank you so much. I don't even know how to thank you. I'll take you up on your offer because I have no other choice. I have no phone, no money. I don't even have the keys to my own apartment or papers. I have a spare key, but I'm afraid to go to her place. That's good." The man was happy. "You'll come to your senses, and then we'll think about it." Sergey's apartment really turned out to be a huge good quality with good repair. When Nancy stepped over the threshold, a huge striped cat ran out to meet her and began to rub her feet intensively. "Meet him," laughed James. "This is Benedict. I hope you're not allergic, because he's taken a liking to you. That rarely happens. He'll never leave his side now." As if in confirmation of his master's words, the kitten gave an affirmative meow. Nancy laughed. "Don't worry," she assured James. "I love cats. My grandmother and I were Siamese. He followed me everywhere, even walked me to school. And he was so smart. Sometimes I used to swear at how human he was." Yeah, they can do that. Not all of them, though. Come on, I'll show you around. Peter's not home yet. He's away for a couple days for work. So don't be shy." The host led the guest through the rooms, showed her a bedroom where she could make herself at home. After the tour, Nancy asked to take a bath. James had prepared some clothes for her, apparently belonging to his son. "I don't think Peter will be too upset to part with a couple of shirts." James winked at her. Nancy finally relaxed into the hot water. She could only now feel how exhausted her body was. After being in the tub for almost an hour, the girl went into the kitchen. Flavored tea was waiting for her. "Here's Nancy," James told her. Walked to the table, serving jam. "I made cherry jam myself this morning." "Oh, really?" Nancy was surprised when she tasted a spoonful of jam. "It's delicious." "Yes, I have my own cherries. We have a whole orchard outside the city," laughed James. "And cooking is my hobby. I used to always fight with my late wife, who will stand at the stove, cook all these berries and vegetables. But I can't help it. I like it. And she herself admitted that I'm better at it. It's rare to get a man to do all that, isn't it?" Nancy thought. She and Frank used to buy everything ready-made. Their grandmother used to supply them with jam. Since she was a child, Nancy had loved to watch her work with berries over a huge copper basin. And then they would roll the jars together. The girl was always waiting for her grandmother to be distracted, so she could take advantage of her absence and savor the hot, sweet treat. "There's no way to force it. It's a passion," James continued. "Some are into fishing, some are into soccer, and I'm into jam. We are all different." Benedict suddenly appeared and jumped on Nancy's lap. The girl began to rub him behind the ear, which made the cat make deep trumpet sounds. It sounded more like a running tractor than a purr. After sitting with James in the kitchen for a while longer, Nancy excused herself to go to bed. The bed, though small, was very comfortable. The blanket helped her fall asleep immediately. The next morning, Nancy woke up well rested, no one bothering her. When she glanced at her watch, she was greatly surprised. It was already 12 o'clock. A normal girl would get up around 9. She got dressed and left the room. James she found in the living room. The man was sitting at his laptop. "Oh, Nancy, good morning," greeted James. "How did you sleep?" "Good morning." Nancy smiled. "Everything is just fine. I don't usually sleep this long. It's a normal reaction to stress. The body has to get its energy from somewhere to recover. Have you been stressed out a lot? Let me feed you breakfast." Nancy readily agreed. James made scrambled eggs and toast, and the deliciously brewed coffee chased away the remnants of sleep. "And now, Nancy." Sighing, James began, clearing the table. "Tell me, why was your hubby going to do such a terrible thing? You must agree, it is not the most common practice to do such a thing because of disagreements. You can always get a divorce. It's not my business, of course, but I would like to have a full picture to help you move on." Nancy took a long time to collect her thoughts. When she told James about her misadventures, she hadn't gone into much detail. Nor was she herself 100% sure of her suspicions. However, the explanation with the inheritance turned out to be the most logical, so she hurried to share the assumption with her savior. "I think," she began, "it's all about the paintings. I received an inheritance from my grandmother a year ago. At first I thought all these landscapes were just old junk. But Frank insisted on an appraisal. It turned out I was the owner of a multi-million-dollar fortune. What are these paintings?" James wondered. "My grandmother told me that these paintings used to belong to my grandfather. I didn't know him at all. He died when I was 2. My grandfather was a collector of paintings, but our family had never been wealthy. I can't imagine how he could have gotten such expensive paintings. As the expert said, some of them belong to the brushes of very famous Russian artists, but belong to the early periods of their work or to the so-called gift works. This is when the author wrote for his friends, and the paintings never made it beyond private collections. I wonder where your grandfather got such a treasure. We'll never know. But after he died, it all went to my grandmother, and then to me. Frank really wanted to sell it all at once to invest in some project of her own. I never took much interest in the details of my husband's work. You should have. We sold one painting. He invested the money right away. He always made good money. My questions were just dismissed. Once he tried to show me the mechanism of work, but to me all these figures and graphs always seemed like gibberish. I'm a pure humanitarian. Any formulas put me in a state of unbearable boredom. But then I was afraid to risk and said that the paintings will sell only as needed. Where are they now? They're all in a bank vault. Frank doesn't have access to them. And anyway, you see, if we divorced, he'd get nothing. My death would solve all his problems. I don't know. It would have been a lot easier to convince me to hang it up at home and order good copies, gradually replacing the originals. I never would have even suspected anything wrong. But I guess my husband wasn't that smart or didn't have the money. And the woman he was with at the time, I have absolutely no idea who she is or what kind of relationship they are in. Well, James thought, it shouldn't be too hard to find out. We already know her name and that she meets your husband from time to time. And that house, you say? She said she used to go there a lot, so we can run the owners. Yeah, but she said she didn't own the house. That's okay. Either way, the owner has something to do with her. Relative, friend, neighbor. Any information you can get. Leave it to me, please. Believe me, I have some experience in this sort of thing. Really? Nancy was surprised. No, I'm not a private detective or an agent. James laughed, seeing her reaction. I just feel it's my duty of honor to bring villains to justice. I'm former military. Really? I'm not surprised, though, seeing as how you kicked the door down with a couple of punches. No, it was just the wood was sticky enough. If I'd been younger, I could have broken it down with one. What do you think, James? Nancy asked after a moment's thought. They've already discovered I'm gone. It's not impossible, the man thought. Even if they have, they're panicking now and trying to figure out where they've gone. Given the broken door, it wouldn't be hard to guess that someone helped. The other thing is, does it realize you're still alive? And I did a pretty convincing job of playing dead. They might think someone just took my body. They might think that, James nodded. If they do, we have a chance to play the game with them, but on our terms. But we'll have to wait for Peter. I'm sure he'll be happy to help us. In the meantime, I don't recommend you leave these walls. There's a risk you might run into someone on the street and they'll pass it on to Frank. I agree, and I don't really need to go anywhere. Peter arrived the following evening. Nancy and James were having dinner in the kitchen when the owner's son came in. He was a fairly young tall man with blonde hair and bright blue eyes. Nancy didn't even think there was such a rich color in nature. "Hi, Daddy," he greeted, catching a glimpse of the girl. "I see you have company. Why don't you introduce yourself?" "Yes, son, come in. We're having dinner." James fussed. "This is Nancy, Peter." The guy extended his hand, which she shook firmly. Peter noticed that her wrists were marked with a creepy-looking scar. "Long time to come," his father interrupted him. "Don't get the wrong idea. This girl is in trouble, and you and I have to help her." "How was it?" Peter asked with suspicion in his voice as he continued to stare at Nancy. "What happened?" I wondered. "I was robbed at the train station. I had nowhere to go." Nancy couldn't answer for some reason. She felt ashamed. For some reason, she thought her savior's son would not be happy to see her in his own home as an embarrassed girl. James came to the rescue. The son said sharply Peter and immediately changed his expression. "What, do you think I dragged all the beggars into the house? You know me, I offered Nancy to stay with us for a while. I rescued that girl from an abandoned house a few days ago, tied up and scared to death, and I feel it's my duty as a man to help her deal with her abusers." "In what way is that related?" Peter interrogated. "Why didn't you go to the police?" "She wants to send me to the other world, in fact," Nancy said in a low voice. Peter was silent. He saw that the girl was serious, and from her wounded arm she confirmed her father's words. So Peter rested his hands on the edge of the table. "Let's be more specific." Nancy repeated her story again, mentioning the paintings as the most probable motive for the crime. Now she herself thought the whole story was a bit crazy. But after listening to the end, Peter suddenly became interested. "So I take it you're not going to go to the police?" "So no proof other than my word." "And that's true. I was an investigator myself for a few years. I'd take a statement, but I don't think I'd make a case. The only thing left to do is either try to catch them red-handed, which is almost unrealistic, given that it would put you at great risk, or play a little with them." James suggested as well. Nancy laughed. "I can tell you're his son." "Very interesting." Peter looked at his father. "What kind of game are you playing, Dad?" "We think James has taken a fancy to us. We think they're convinced Nancy's dead and someone's found her body. So maybe we should blackmail them a little bit. Might work?" Peter scratched his chin. "They're probably panicking and won't go anywhere. But we have to get as much information as we can." "You know," Nancy suddenly exclaimed, "I have a friend named Alice. She's a very nice girl. I don't think she's in cahoots with them. I'm afraid to go to her myself. I don't know if Frank will be there waiting for me. But if you talk to her, Peter, she might be able to help." "Okay, I'll keep that in mind." The next day, James got information about the owners of the abandoned building where he'd found Nancy. The house belonged to a Sophia. It wasn't hard to find this woman. Peter involved old acquaintances, and in a couple of hours he had the data. The guy volunteered to personally drive to the old lady's house and make inquiries about Clara. The address was a nursing home. Peter introduced himself as the woman's grandson. Luckily for him, no one asked for any documents. A nurse escorted him to the room where Sophia lived. When Peter entered, the nose was hit by the acrid smell of medicines. The old woman was sitting at a desk reading something. Peter was sharing. "Sophia, hello," he said loudly. The woman shuddered and looked up at him, her eyes hidden behind thick glasses. "Good morning." She greeted him with a well-pitched and surprisingly young voice. She was 86 years old according to her documents. "I'm sorry, I don't recognize you. My eyes don't look the same. Come closer." "Sophia, my name is Max. I'm here at Clara's request. I brought you some fruit." Peter put a heavy bag on the table. "The old lady has been sitting on her hands for a long time and she hasn't shown up. She's doing well. Yes, Sophia, Clara is working very hard. She has no time. She asked me. How could I refuse? We've been friends since we were kids, since school. The old lady asked me again. I don't remember you. Max, you say you're not Livingston. by any chance? No, Peter immediately sensed some kind of trick in the tone of the interlocutor. Solntsev, but Clara and I didn't go to the same school. If that's what you mean, I think I've softened. Sophia, I seem to remember all my students, but I don't recognize you. My eyesight, is no longer the same. But I recognize every single one of my Cossacks, no matter how much time has passed. Cindy, she's one of the few people who visits me here. You'd think she'd have forgotten the old woman by now and lived in peace. No, she can't be like that. The girl's so kind to her. She's always been different from the others. It's been 21 years since graduation, and she's always with flowers and sweets. The nurse comes running to me. She only manages to grumble again, saying that your Clara came and raised everyone's ears. But I smile. I'm just glad that I taught such a smart girl. Good for you. Peter nodded to himself, thinking how cruelly mistaken this woman was. If she knew what her former student was doing, probably would not smile. Now weakened by a heart attack, no less. And you say you went to another school? Yeah, 32nd, nodded Peter. Oh, so it's right next door to ours, the 17th. Yes, it's a pity you didn't get into my class. They were my last class. I retired as soon as they graduated. And now, you see, I've fallen apart. Nobody needs me. Peter spent some more time in the old woman's company, but he could not learn anything useful, although the information he got from Sophia could be useful. Leaving the nursing home, he dialed the number of his friend from the authorities. Mish, he began quickly. Listen, it is urgent to run a person through. Don't ask anything. It'll count for something later. Oh, there was a cheerful voice on the other end of the line. But then he heard a serious matter. Write it down. Clara, age 37-39 years. Registered in the Bright Street. Probably a different address now, but she used to live there. I don't know much data. Please check life and death issues. I know yours. You probably picked up another hottie from death, didn't you? Now you're looking for where she lives so you can wait with flowers. Peter, stop being a romantic. I already divorced one of them for that. Find yourself a good woman, a good housewife, and live in peace. Mike, all wrong, started Peter, but in time realized that it is not worth explaining that the curious comrade is not worth it. Okay, let's as the data will be dialed immediately. I'm listening and obeying, Mike sneered. The former colleague called back in an hour. He dictated to Peter 3 addresses for a woman with such data. Yes, Peter thought 3 isn't much, but it's not a lot. Considering I have no idea what this Clara looks like. All right, well, there's no traffic. Let's run down each of them. To the first address. Door was opened by a haggard-looking woman. She was in her early 60s. Good afternoon, greeted Peter. I can see Valeria. Are you for pennies? Tiredly asked the hostess. I started to Peter, but the woman was already pulling him out into the hallway. Clara got worse today. I woke up in the morning. She is lying on the floor. She must have tried to get into the stroller herself. The stroller. That's what Peter said. Yes, in a wheelchair. Didn't you know that? She's been disabled since she was a child. She can't walk since the accident, but she's still trying to get up. I'm sorry. I tried to free Peter from the woman's clutches. I must have made a mistake. I need Clara. The woman looked at him, flapping her eyes. Suddenly, it was as if she woke up. Oh, I thought, I'm sorry to drag you in like this. Didn't even recognize anything. Is it mine, Cindy? Peter went to the second address, but the stern man at the door said that Valerie no longer lives here. 3 years moved to the States. He had one last address left. The house was located right next to the school number 17 mentioned by Sophia. But that should be a sure hit, Peter thought. But if it really is the same woman, he should be more careful. Tales of schoolmates won't fly. Peter pressed the bell button several times, but no one came to the door. He had already decided to come back later, when suddenly the door opened and a middle-aged woman looked out of the apartment. She asked him in a disgruntled tone, I'm sorry, Peter was confused, and I must have woken you up. My name is Max. I've just been to see Sophia, your teacher. Oh my God. Clara was worried. Something's happened to her. She had a heart attack yesterday and was composing Peter. She's fine now. They couldn't reach you for some reason? I'm next on the list. I talked to her today. She really asked me to come and see you. I'll be right there." It was obvious that Clara was very concerned about the old lady. It bothered Peter a lot. He couldn't understand how she could be so caring and cruel at the same time. "Did you also study with her? Or a relative? I just don't remember her having grandchildren." "I'm a distant relative," lied Peter, "on my mother's side. I don't live here, so I don't get to visit her much." "Oh, don't worry, they won't let you see her today anyway. I brought everything. She just said to ask where you've been." "You mean you haven't visited in a while?" "Yes," Clara sighed. "It's just the way it is. I've had a lot of problems of my own. I'm so sorry. I'll be sure to visit her one of these days." Peter said goodbye to the woman, who seemed very tired. It was obvious that Clara hadn't lied about her problems, except that Peter knew very well what kind of trouble the woman was in. Well, now he knew where she lived and what she looked like. He made the decision to sit in the car and observe her. Realizing that the woman wouldn't get out that easily, he decided to get active. He dialed the number Frank had given him from Nancy. A man's voice answered unfriendly. "Hello, Frank," Peter began. "Your wife, or rather, her body?" There was silence on the other end of the line for a long time. Frank must have digested what he heard. "What do you want?" He finally squeezed out. "How much money for silence?" $3 million. Peter said it at random. "Are you crazy? I don't have that amount." "What made you think you had my wife? It wasn't that hard to establish. And don't think that if you don't pay, you'll get off easy. I have footage of your car being at the scene for quite some time." "The time of the girl's death fits right in that gap," sighed Peter. "Let's skip the details, especially now you've asked me what I want. So you really know what I'm talking about. Are you from the police?" Frank suddenly asked. "No," Peter laughed. "If I were the police, we'd be talking differently." "Okay, but I need proof. Can you send me a picture of the body?" "Sure, it'll take me a while. I'll get back to you. As long as it's still that money. If you don't raise the required amount within a week, I'll contact you. Then you'll have to deal with it another way." Peter has disconnected. Now all we had to do was wait. Half an hour later, Clara came out of the entrance and got into a car parked nearby. Peter followed her, looping through the city streets. He already guessed that she had gone to Frank's house. The woman went into the house, but Peter wasn't going to end the stakeout there. Clara stayed at Frank's for about an hour. She came out highly agitated and angry. Slamming the door, she went on her way. Peter followed her, but the woman only stopped at the store and headed home. Peter then decided not to waste any time and drove home. Anyway, so he started from the doorstep. "I tracked down this Clara of yours and called Frank with a ransom demand for the body, as Nancy had mentioned. And what did he say? He agrees, but he wants proof. He wants a photo. So Nancy, let's get you under the body. Do you still have that dress you were wearing back then?" "Yeah, I lost it actually." "That's okay, but I'll have to tie you up and stain your face with something that looks like written blood." "I have paints," said James, who came into the hallway. "I think it'll look pretty natural." It took the next half hour to cremate Nancy. Peter spread plastic sheeting in the hallway for the girl to lie on. They took a few pictures, after which the guy did a little color work, correction. When Nancy saw the pictures, she was even horrified. She really did look dead in the pictures. "Do you think it'll work?" she asked Peter. "It's going to work." The bastard didn't even blink an eye and agreed. The only thing he cared about was where to get the money. Obviously, this couple is in a panic, very afraid of exposure. All the more I frightened him, saying that I had evidence regarding the location of his car at the time of the crime. "Your eyes are so rounded, Nancy." "Wow. What if he demanded it?" "You know," sighed Peter, "I'm the blackmailer here, and I'm the only one who can demand anything." He dialed Frank's number and arranged where he could send the photos anonymously. After examining the contents of the messages, Frank became even more nervous. "How will the transaction proceed?" "You will transfer me the money to the specified details. Within half an hour, I will send you the coordinates of the body. How can I be sure that you will not cheat? Believe me, I'm only interested in money. Otherwise, I wouldn't even call you. What you do with the corpse afterwards is none of my business. Well, that was Frank. No, but rudely interrupted Peter. We're serious people. I don't think you need to be reminded that you shouldn't go to the police. Besides, you don't stand a chance. I'm sure your sweat and grease marks will be found on the body. So you might want to think before you do something stupid. I understand you perfectly well. Frank snapped at me. Not an idiot. Peter grumbled, hanging up discreetly. A real idiot. He sat silently, thinking about something. Nancy was anxious to know the details. James had been pacing nervously for several minutes. That's what. Peter suddenly broke the silence. You said Alice had spare keys to the apartment. She does, Nancy nodded. But I don't know how to get them without giving myself away. We'll have to take our chances. There's no other way. Why do we need to get into the apartment? I think the couple would be actively planning their next move right now. Judging by the fact that Clara went to Frank's house today, it'll happen again, since the apartment was undisturbed. I plan to install a microphone so I can record conversations. I'm sensing they can talk a lot without witnesses. Peter. His father turned to him. You realize you won't be able to get those recordings in court. That's what's needed. Having such a trump card up your sleeve, you can easily divorce these lovebirds on official recognition. The main thing is a competent approach. All right, Nancy agreed. Let's go then. There's no point in delaying right now. Frank must have called his mistress by now. I don't think she'll go to him again tonight. Besides, they're both busy thinking about finding the right amount of money. But we're on our way to Alice now. Nancy. Alice shouted happily, hugging her friend. Where have you been? You can't imagine how worried I was. It's a mess at work. No one knows where you are. The phone's silent. Frank says you're sick, and you can't even pick up the phone. But I know that's not true. I've been to see you. He wouldn't even let me in. I didn't know where to look. The best part is he came by and asked me if it was summer. I was so surprised. And then I call him. Your phone is disconnected, and he's talking about this disease. I wonder what kind of sickness it is that you can't answer your friend close to you. Nancy, best friends unleashed. What I'm about to tell you must stay between us. Do you understand me? Alice looked at her intently. Nancy's tone was not at all joking. The girl realized that her friend was in some kind of trouble, and the man she came with was unfamiliar to her. Nancy introduced her companion. This is Peter, my friend. Alice is my best friend. Peter and Alice exchanged handshakes. The girl liked the man very much. She was very curious where Nancy had managed to meet such a handsome man and disappeared for a few days. Obviously, the friend had gotten into some kind of adventure. That's why Frank's so angry. Alice invited the guests into the room and sat them down on the couch. Well, she began. Tell me. Alice, please don't panic. Nancy warned her at once. The situation is as follows. Frank has turned out to be quite a scoundrel. I know it's hard to believe, but he tried to send me to the afterlife. What? Rounded his eyes. Alice, Frank, he's such a Hamlet. I'm sorry. He can't even cut up a chicken. I remember at the barbecue he stood there with a knife in his hand and cried. Alice, I'm serious. On our anniversary, he gave me sleeping pills, and then I woke up in some abandoned house, tied up. Look at this. Nancy showed me the rope marks still visible on my wrists. It's horrible, whoops. Alice. But that's not all. Nancy continued. Then Frank and some woman came there, and they were seriously discussing how to get rid of me. They wanted to cause an accident. This auntie knows people in all the agencies. No one would even dig. Accidents and accidents. I'd just be buried. Only it didn't go according to plan. I pretended to be dead. Very successful, by the way. So they had to leave my body there while they prepared the next one. That's where Peter's dad found me. Are you kidding me? Alice couldn't believe it. Why on earth would he get rid of you? You've been married 6 years? I don't even remember one serious fight. That's true, my friend. Except I think it's all about the money. Money? Alice was surprised. He makes good money. Why does he need your money? I'm not sure he makes good money anymore. Remember how he persuaded me to sell all the paintings? I only agreed to sell one. I got a good deal on that one, and I gave him every penny of it. He invested, and guess what? It's been almost a year, and I still haven't seen him make any serious profit. I mean, he's made some withdrawals, but given the amount of money he's invested, the amounts aren't commensurate. Have you talked to him about it? Of course I did, but it made sense to me at the time. He convinced me that there was no point in withdrawing the profit and that it was easier to keep it in the system so that it would work and bring in more money. She showed me all sorts of figures, but I don't understand anything about it. What do you think? I think there's no money in the accounts. According to my calculations, there should have been several million in there. In fact, there's only a few $100,000. I don't know where the money went, but now I'm pretty sure it's all mine. Frank spent on his mistress Clara this, with which they plotted to remove me. Alice has digested the information. So what do we do now? There's no way for you to go home. And we've put on a little show, Peter said. These two think Nancy is dead. That's what we thought we'd take advantage of. Oh my God. Alice was horrified. I contacted Frank under the guise of the body snatchers. When they came to the house to get Nancy, they found the door broken in from the outside and no body. Now I'm charging them a tidy sum, which Peter says he doesn't have. Alice, said Nancy, we need the keys to my apartment. Peter wants to install a wiretap, so we'll be aware of the couple's plans. Yes, of course, nodded Alice. You just have to get Frank out of the house somehow. You know he doesn't get out much. Don't worry about that, Nancy said. Most importantly, I beg you, don't blab to anyone that you saw me. You're kidding your lips for a long time, Alice. What do you take me for? That I put you in the clutches of these scumbags. I have some interesting information for you, Peter said into the phone. You need to come now, drop off the coordinates. Where? What kind of information? Frank asked cautiously. When you arrive, you'll find out. I hope you are collecting money. We're running out of time. Don't rush me, Frank snapped at me. I told you everything will happen. Peter sent Frank the coordinates. There was no information for him, but it was necessary to lure the man out of the house. Peter sat in the car in front of the driveway. After a few minutes, Frank came out, got into the car, and drove away. Peter wasted no time and went up to the apartment. He opened the door, disarmed the alarm system using the code Nancy had given him. He walked through the rooms and set up 3 microphones in different rooms where he thought Frank and Clara might be most likely to be. Well, he said aloud, I hope this works. He hurriedly left the apartment and called Frank again. There's been a mix-up, he reported. Don't go anywhere. I'll get back to you later. Frank cursed back, but Peter wouldn't listen and disconnected. The man quickly drove home, where his father and Nancy were waiting for him. Everything is ready, he informed his household. Peter turned on his laptop and opened some program. Let's hear what they have going on. For a long time, nothing was heard. Then Frank's voice came out. He was on the phone. Clara said, man, come over right away. I'll meet you there. About 40 minutes later, Clara arrived. Nancy could hear her heels clacking and a disgruntled voice. We're going to have to take a risk, Frank told her. Are you ready? What else is left? What do you have in mind? We need to get to the paintings. That's easy for you to say. Doesn't it bother you that only your wife has access to the vault, and she's dead? Look, all the documents in here are key to the safe deposit box. And the cell phone, too. I visited the vault with her. It's rudimentary, no biometrics or anything like that. You just go to the bank, show your ID, fill out a couple of forms, and unlock the box with your own key. Who would go, I wondered? Clara grinned. You and me. Are you serious now? You think the bank employees are so stupid that you can't tell one woman from another, and you're serious. Do you two look alike in build? Do you even have a face in common? Put on a little more color. Put on a wig, her clothes, now practice signing her name. She's only been to the bank once. I don't think anyone remembers her very well. Anyway, this is our chance. And we can take it all at once, pay off the kidnappers, get rid of the corpse, and then just disappear. That's enough money for you, me and Thomas, to live on for several lifetimes. Who's Thomas? Nancy asked in a whisper. Quiet. Peter interrupted her. It's all for later. I don't know, Frank, Clara continued. The idea seems dubious to me. And if we all get in, How will you come with a confident look and show the documents? Well, who, tell me, is an exact copy of his passport photo? The most important thing is to act without hesitation, so that no one sees your excitement. All the more reason for me to be with you. In fact, if we don't take the risk, we'll be in a very unpleasant situation. If Nancy's body turns up anywhere, we'll both end up in jail. Especially since this man claims he has proof that we were at the crime scene when she died. Even if he's bluffing, we can't take any chances. I'd be the first to get suspected. I can't take you with me, of course. But what are you going to do without me? All right. After a short hesitation, Clara agreed. And they will not be embarrassed that I am 10 years older than your wife, and I'm not making it up. You don't look your age. Besides, it's hard to tell how old a woman is. Okay? Clara agreed with doubt in her voice. Tell me something. So they give us the body. What are we going to do with it? There's no way to fix the accident. It's been days. We'll have to get rid of it. I'll file a missing persons report and have the police look for it. After a while, she'll be reported missing because we won't care about the inheritance. It won't concern us anymore. We'll all go away together as far away as possible. There's nothing to keep you here. If the body turns up, how are we going to dispose of it? In the woods? Dig? No, we need another way. A safer way, you know? Suddenly, Clara added, after some thought. I have a friend who works in a chemical factory. If he's well paid, he can get nitric acid. I've heard it dissolves any organic matter without a trace. Acid? Frank asked in horror. What's the big deal? It's the perfect solution for us. No one will ever find Nancy. Let everyone dig around. Yeah, there's something to it. All right, let's buy the body first, then we'll decide. But I'll contact my contact. The rest of the conversation was of no value in terms of case information. When Clara left, Peter and Nancy looked at each other. You realize they're just going to rob me outright, Nancy said indignantly. After the previous events, it seems ridiculous, Peter grinned. Don't worry, they won't get away with it. But we can catch them in the act. I wondered, Nancy thought. Who was this Thomas they were talking to? Is there someone else in their gang that we didn't know about? I'll try to find out, Peter wondered. He didn't like the fact that there was someone else in the case either. Nancy, Peter, and James were discussing a plan of further action. There were two options. According to the first, they were to report the planned robbery and catch the criminals red-handed at the bank when the paintings were in their hands. The second option suggested a more complicated chain of events. Peter proposed to let Frank and Clara leave the bank, and to catch them in the act later, when they tried to get rid of the stolen goods. It was obvious that Frank would try to sell one of the paintings on the black market to get the required sum for it quickly, for time was pressing him hard. Peter knew of several suitable sites by virtue of his old service. All the more reason to know exactly where Frank would try to auction the canvas. Listening to their dialogues with Clara, after a small meeting it was decided to stop at the second option. At 12 o'clock noon, Peter and Nancy were sitting in the car parked in front of the bank branch where the vault was located. They knew what time Frank and Clara would be arriving. The couple had been making intensive preparations since the morning, discussing their every move, so all they had to do was wait for them. Around 1:30, Frank's car pulled up in front of the bank. When Clara got out, Nancy cried out in surprise. The criminals had done their best. In the clothes they had found, Clara looked exactly like her with her long black wig and glasses. Look, she turned to Peter. Well done. If I'd met her like that in the city, I'd have thought I was crazy. Very much like that indeed, nodded Peter. Tell me, are there really no biometric sensors? Strangely enough, not these days. It's enough for them that you have a key to the box, documents. I was surprised myself that they don't even require a fingerprint. But I was assured by the personal manager that the vault was absolutely secure. Personal manager, are you sure he won't notice the switch? That's just it, Nancy laughed. Frank knows perfectly well that the old employee has moved on and I've been assigned a new one. He's never seen me in person before, we've only talked on the phone. So this couple has a good chance of success. When you sign the application for access to the safe deposit box, it's authenticated by phone, just give me the code. Do they have a phone? And Peter's thinking again, let's hope they succeed. Although for us any outcome is favorable, just the punishment for theft for them will be less severe than for the attempt to get rid of you and the sale of the painting. It's ridiculous to even hope for the success of your own enemies. Nancy grinned grimly. Frank and Clara stayed at the bank for about an hour. Nancy was beginning to worry that the staff suspected something wrong and called the police. Soon, however, the couple emerged from the branch carrying bulky flat bags, each containing a canvas bag. Nancy recognized the pouches as she had personally packed the paintings in them before taking them to storage. Look, she turned to Peter. They've taken everything. See, they have 3 bags with 5 paintings in each. Well done, nodded Peter. I can't tell you anything. And here's the scoundrel himself. All right, now we can't delay. We must hear what they were going to do next. When Frank and Clara reached the apartment, Peter turned on the tape again. I told you this would work. Frank's voice was happy and excited. You're doing great. You should have seen yourself. I even believed it was you, Nancy, for a moment. You should have known how scared I was. I thought I'd get caught at any moment on a little thing. We were very lucky to have the head of the department. That woman had her eye on me the last time I was here. So all the attention was directed at me, and you didn't notice her flirting openly with me. It was funny, I noticed. Clara laughed. Women. Show a handsome man and they forget everything. So what do we do now? Let's choose a painting. I'll put it on the internet auction. If we bid low, they'll buy it fast. We've got a few days left, so we'll find a buyer. Look, there's a couple of sites. We'll put it up everywhere to be sure. Frank appeared to be showing Clara the sites. Their names were familiar to Peter. Every time they heard another name that Frank said, they typed it into the search engine. Peter nodded contentedly. That's good, he said aloud. As I thought, your husband is not original. He picked the most famous venues. How does he know them? Nancy wondered. It's not the first time he's used them. You didn't know him at all. Husband's a real piece of work. Why, I'm not even surprised, Nancy sighed, noting to herself that Peter had slipped into the first name. She decided to use his example. And now you want to pretend to be a buyer? Yes, but we need to know exactly what painting they're showing. Otherwise, we're going to be going through 100 years of bids. It's not like he's going to put it up under his own name. They're taking their time choosing. As if hearing his words, the criminals began to discuss the painting that would be their ticket to a better life. The main thing now is not to be greedy, said Frank. Look, we will have to put the most expensive painting very cheaply according to the appraisal documents. This painting is the most valuable thing in the collection, but it can be sold much more expensive than Clara reasoned. It is possible, but only at an official auction. Not forgetting that we got the paintings illegally, you cannot sell them officially. Our main goal now is to sell one painting, so that the proceeds would be enough for the ransom and our escape. We'll sell the rest gradually. Of course, we'll lose a lot of money, but we won't have to share it with anyone. And in any case, it'll be enough money for a secure old age. Not even our Thomas. That's how Clara's voice sounded more enthusiastic. Of course, then you can take care of the documents on the paintings, but that they are supposedly in my property and sell already much more expensive. Moreover, no one will report the theft. Now I'm going to ask you to take a picture of the canvas. I'm not much of a photographer. While Clara was busy taking pictures, Nancy frantically remembered which of the paintings was the most expensive. According to the expert's estimation, the intruders had stubbornly failed to pronounce either the title of the work or its author. Here it is. Suddenly she shrieked. I remembered. She told Peter which painting the scoundrels wanted to sell, but there was no advertisement with such a law on the websites. It took about 2 hours until finally the proposal was posted. I had to wait a while longer before writing to the seller so as not to arouse his suspicion. Clara called Frank. Look, we seem to have a potential client. Is he serious? The woman asked, puzzled. I can't tell you yet. He's interested, if the documents and all that. I gave him the results of the examination and hinted that the picture got to me not quite honest way. Are you crazy? Who would buy stolen goods out in the open like that? Or don't be ridiculous. Frank calmed her down. That's exactly the point. Peter realized that Frank was hooked and was eager to play the interested customer. He even asked if he could do his own due diligence before the deal. Frank agreed, but his only requirement was time. He hinted to the buyer that he needed to get the deal done as soon as possible, so lengthy appraisals were out of the question. Peter agreed, assuring him that the appraisal would take no more than an hour. It would require meeting at any convenient location with an expert he would send. Frank said that he would bring the painting at any time to wherever it was needed. Peter then gave his own address, saying that there was an art expert living there who would be willing to provide such a service. The meeting was set for the evening. All that was left was to wait. James volunteered to play the expert. He thought that Frank could recognize Peter by his voice, as he repeatedly talked to him on the phone. They prepared everything they needed. Peter went somewhere and brought some optical devices, a scalpel and jars with chemicals. Look, he turned to his father and Nancy. This is usually used to authenticate a painting. Dad, you'll need to look through a magnifying glass like this. Apply a couple of strokes of ruler and acid around the edges of the painting and write a report. I'll prepare the files. All you have to do is print it out and sign it. I got it, son. Don't worry. I hope this Frank doesn't know much about this kind of work. No, Nancy was quick to reassure him. He doesn't know anything about this stuff. He didn't even go to the initial examination with me, so you won't suspect anything. Good, Peter nodded. When the doorbell rang in the evening, Nancy and Peter locked themselves in the back room, and James went to meet the guest. Peter had set up a miniature camera in the living room, where the examination was to take place, so that everything that happened would be recorded. Greetings. James greeted the visitor. My name is Anthony. A mutual acquaintance of ours told me you'd be stopping by today. Please come into the room. Let's not waste any time. Yes, nodded Frank, holding a large rug in his hand. I hope it's not a long process. It all depends on the condition of the cloth. James played the expert with conviction. I tend to see the originals right away. On the other hand, my client said that the painting belongs to the unknown works of this artist, but there are some features characteristic of his brush. Don't worry, I'm a specialist just on it. So it shouldn't be too difficult to identify a non-original. I don't think you would take up my time by bringing the copy here. Of course not, Frank exclaimed hotly. I have the official report in hand, but the client insisted on an additional examination. And his wish is law. Let me take a look. Frank handed James the papers. The man studied the contents of the document for a long time, nodding for conviction. I see you've gone to a good specialist, he said. He read the paper to the end. A former colleague of mine. You can trust his judgment. But let's take a look at the paintings. James carefully divided the canvas into steel, turned on the lamp, and began to manipulate, giving the appearance of professional work. Frank watched his actions carefully. James realized that he was very nervous, but continued, trying not to be distracted by the visitor. Look at this, he turned to Frank. You see, these strokes are characteristic of the artist. Few people have painted in such a technique. It's very difficult to replicate. The Rockefellers are talking about the age of the canvas. It's a match. We'll do a little more chemical analysis, and then we're done. James applied a small amount of the reagents, waited a couple of minutes, and dedicated an ultraviolet lamp to the treated area. Well, after a while, he informed Frank, I can say with certainty that we have the original in front of us. Who would doubt it? Replied Frank. Now I will print you a report, so our client can be sure that everything is in order. I will call him now to verbally confirm that he can safely purchase the painting. While Frank packed the canvas back up, James pretended to be on the phone. He printed out the file his son had prepared, signed it, and escorted Frank out, telling him that he could contact him at any time, should such services be needed again. When the visitor left, Nancy and Paul came out of their hiding place. So was everything all right? James smiled. Now it's up to you. The meeting with Frank was scheduled for 12 o'clock. The place for the transaction was a small office, which Peter had rented in advance so that nothing would arouse the seller's suspicions. The office consisted of a reception area and 2 rooms. The first, Peter set up his workplace. In the second sat Nancy in the company of 2 employees from the investigation committee. Peter's old colleagues whom he had brought up to speed. A girl who also worked for the police was put in the reception area and had to pose as a secretary. When she entered Peter's office and informed the visitors everything was already ready for the play, Frank entered, carrying the same coffee in his hands. "Hello," he shook Peter's hand. "Let's not introduce ourselves to each other. I think it's unnecessary." "Good afternoon," Frank responded to the handshake. Peter's voice sounded vaguely familiar, but he couldn't remember where he had heard it. "I second that. Let's get this done as soon as possible. Anthony called me yesterday and said everything was fine. I'll take a look at the picture myself. If I'm satisfied, I'll wire you the money right away. Is that okay?" "Quite," Frank nodded. "How about some coffee?" Peter asked. "I wouldn't say no," nodded Frank. Sitting down in the chair, Peter pressed a button on the switchboard and asked the secretary for 2 coffees. A couple of minutes later, Nancy entered the office from the next room, holding a tray with 2 cups. Frank sat with his back to her, so he didn't immediately notice when she came up to his side, placing one of the cups next to her. And he turned around to thank her, then froze with his mouth open. The next second, he rushed to the front door, but it was locked. To no avail. Pulling the knob, Frank tried not to look at his wife. Frank suddenly turned to him. "Sit down, please." He stood for a few seconds in indecision, then obediently sat down in the chair. "What's going on with your voice?" he asked. "Can't you guess?" Nancy answered him. Frank felt his palms sweating. He looked at his wife, and they ghosted. "See, darling, calm down," she went on. "It's all over. Are you alive?" Barely moving his tongue, he said. "But how did I see your corpse myself?" "I know, darling," she smiled. "I'm a good actress. Aren't you?" "Who are you?" Frank turned to Peter. "I'm the one who gave your wife a chance to take revenge on her abusers. Are you with the police?" "No," Peter said absent-mindedly. And then Frank realized he was the man he had spoken to on the phone. "What are you up to?" he asked angrily. "Do you think you can accuse me of anything? You have no proof. In short, no one will believe even the convincing ones." "That's where you're wrong," Peter interrupted him. "We have more than enough evidence. All your conversations with Clara were recorded, as was your visit to the expert. Even if we can't get you for attempted murder, believe me, you'll go to a place not so far away for grand larceny. That shouldn't be too hard to prove. I think the bank records will suffice. And keep in mind that not only you, but also your friend will suffer. She was the main perpetrator, taking the paintings from the box." "It was all her," Frank said after a moment's pause, sighing heavily. "Nancy, I didn't mean to. I swear to you." "Didn't mean to what?" His wife looked at him scornfully. "Getting rid of me, we've heard everything from planning the accident. You drugged me with sleeping pills on the day of our anniversary, ruthlessly tied me up, and didn't even make sure I was really dead. You brazenly stole from me, and then you say you didn't mean to. You don't know anything. Don't tell me you were forced," sighed Peter. "I realize that you're going to start shifting the blame to the other person, although it's obvious that you're both to blame." Frank was silent for a long time, picking the armrest with his fingernail. He realized that he couldn't get away with it. Unless these people were lying. It was clear from their faces that they were determined. The truth would have to be told. He did not expect Nancy to forgive him, but there was still hope inside him that his wife and her acquaintance would show him some mercy. If he repented for what he had done, Clara Frank had met him 4 years ago. At that time, he was already 2 years married and really loved his wife. However, marital happiness was marred by the fact that Nancy did not want children. Unlike her, Frank literally raved about having a child. He dreamed of a son, but any conversations with his wife on this topic did not bring results. The man did not understand how this could be. Both were healthy and had a stable income, their own home. In the eyes of the public, their couple was ideal. Alas, Nancy's maternal instinct was completely absent. One day, after another attempt to persuade his wife to have children, defeated Frank went to the nearest bar. He had already drunk more than 1 glass of whiskey when he saw an attractive woman next to him. The conversation started immediately. The pretty blonde introduced herself as Clara. She was well into her 30s, but her personal life was not going well. The woman had been through a divorce and it turned out that she shared the same problem with Frank. Clara's ex-husband did not want to have children, and this was the reason for the divorce. Clara did not want to give birth just for herself, so a child from a casual relationship was out of the question. The woman dreamed of a full-fledged family. As they say, either everything or nothing. Desperate, she chose the second option. Frank also shared his worries about his wife and their future together. Under the influence of strong drink and common grief, Frank and Clara did not notice how they found themselves in the same bed. The man never thought of cheating on his wife, but then something came over him. In the morning, he repented of his deed and, leaving the apartment, tried to forget about what had happened. However, the new acquaintance did not get out of his head. He went several times to the bar where they met, but the woman was not there. Then he decided to go to her house. Frank himself did not know why, but something irresistibly drew him there. Clara met him, surprised. She had never expected that the casual acquaintance from the bar would show up again. From then on, they began to see each other constantly. Every chance they got, Frank drove to her place. Nancy had no idea. He didn't want to lose his wife, but he wasn't going to give up his mistress either. And then Clara told him that she was pregnant. Frank at first did not even believe it, but while the information gradually reached him, he became more and more confused and seriously, still not believing, he asked Clara, "Yes, I went to the ultrasound yesterday. It's already 8 weeks. Is the due date a boy or a girl?" "Stupid?" asked Frank. "Silly," laughed Clara. "How can you tell at this stage? You have to wait. So you mean you're going to keep the baby?" Frank was surprised. Of course, Clara said it as if she had been slapped in the face. "How can I get rid of it? A child is all I've ever dreamed of. You realize you'll have to raise it alone." Even so, the woman replied sadly, "Will it all work out somehow?" "No, Clara, you mustn't think so." Frank contradicted her hotly. "I won't leave you alone with the baby." "Do you mean to say that he will divorce?" The woman was surprised. If necessary. But time passed, and Frank was in no hurry to tell his wife about his second woman. First, he was afraid of hurting her, and then it was silly to start a conversation. Clara was not satisfied with this state of affairs. She constantly reminded the man of his promise. But Frank found another excuse. When Clara gave birth, she calmed down for a while. All her thoughts were devoted to her newborn son Thomas. She was quite satisfied with the fact that Frank visited them every day, gave gifts, bought everything necessary for the baby. He was deceiving his wife, telling her that all the money he was earning was invested. In reality, any profits he immediately withdrew and gave to Clara and Thomas. He didn't want them to need anything, so he preferred to deceive Nancy, who continued to be clueless. It suited her just fine that her husband had stopped pestering her to have a child. He successfully concealed his left-handed adventures. Constant fluctuations in exchange rates led to the fact that Frank lost on another deal a very large amount. At that time, Thomas was already 2 years old. One day he came to Clara and told her about his financial difficulties. The woman reacted rather aggressively. She is used to getting everything from her lover, just ask for it. But this time her desires and his possibilities were at odds. "How long will it last?" she asked unhappily. "I can't say yet, but we'll have to tighten our belts for the next few months. I know you wanted a car, but I can't buy you one yet. Do you have any idea how hard it is without a car when you have a small child? I can take you anywhere." Frank tried to defend himself. "Of course you can. And what if you need to go to the hospital at night? That you leave your wife and rush to us? I find that hard to believe." "Clara, yeah, you say something like that. I'll be there if you call me. That's my son. What's stopping you from always being there for your son?" The woman rebuked me. "You're doing well, I see. You think if I don't bring up your divorce, I've forgotten everything? No, darling, I'm tired of living like this. It's up to you. Either you do it right now or you get out of our lives." Clara Frank had never expected his mistress to demand such decisive action from him. He had already gotten used to the way things had turned out, so he had stopped thinking about divorce. But now to leave Nancy was simply necessary, otherwise he would lose his son. Clara was a pretty tough person, so she would hardly go back on her word. All right, I'll file divorce papers shortly. But when Frank returned home, Nancy shocked him with the news of the inheritance. And when it turned out that his wife became a millionaire overnight, Frank, thinking that now was not the right time to leave her, especially when they sold the first painting, he immediately became the owner of a tidy sum, which his wife gave to his business without even blinking. Frank immediately bought Clara a car and explained that, since the situation has changed, it is better to wait a little with the divorce, trying to get even more money. Satisfied with the gift, Clara changed from anger to mercy, agreeing to wait. But as time went on, she was in a hurry to sell the canvases. No matter how Frank persuaded her, the problem was that the woman was not interested in money at all. All these profits, exchange rate fluctuations, and other financial things caused in her even more longing than talking about the child. However, she was well aware that painting could be a good investment and a reliable insurance for a rainy day. When Frank explained all this to Clara, the woman became enraged. She realized that the man was not going to divorce, and the money was quickly melting away. It was necessary to find a way out. And one day she suggested a terrible thing to Frank. "Listen, darling," she began affectionately when Frank arrived again. "Tell me, do you love Nancy?" "What are you starting again?" Frank replied unhappily. "And I mean it. No, don't think so. I'm not going to start the topic of divorce again right now." "What then?" the man muttered. He had already subconsciously sensed in Clara's tone some kind of trick. "But do you love her or not?" She insisted. "No, I don't." "You realize I'm with her now, don't you? It's only because of these features of living paintings that I'm trying to get her to sell something. Business is slow. If I don't get any money soon, I won't be able to help you like I used to," Clara said cryptically. "What are you willing to do for Thomas and me?" "Anything," Frank replied passionately. "Anything." Clara smiled. "Then listen to what I have in mind. You won't get anything after the divorce, right?" "That's right," nodded Frank. "What if Nancy dies?" "If she dies, all her property goes to me. I'm the only heir, and she has no relatives." "Well, there's your answer." Clara continued to smile. "I don't understand. What's the answer? What makes you think Nancy is going to die? She's not even 30. No, she's healthy as an ox. You know, honey, there are 1,000 accidents in the world every day." "Wait a minute." Suddenly Frank figured it out. "Are you suggesting we take her out? Fake an accident? What's the big deal?" The woman shrugged. "What's the big deal?" "What's the big deal? It's a living person. What right do we have to send her to the afterlife? It's a crime." "Clara, are you going to lecture me now? You know what I don't like? My plan is failing. Forget about coming here. We don't want your money or you. And don't even think I'll ever be your underground son." Clara knew how to manipulate Frank. He was really willing to do anything for Thomas. He sat there at a complete loss, realizing that the woman wasn't kidding. If he crossed the threshold of the apartment now, he would never see them again. Good. He sighed heavily. "What do you suggest?" "I don't know yet. I just suggested it." Clara said smugly. "Honestly, I didn't think you'd say yes, did I?" "Yes, I'm a rascal." To send his beloved wife to the grave for the sake of his son. Very Shakespearean. Frank chuckled. Lady Macbeth, too, he thought, looking at Clara. They'd do anything for money. Filthy woman. If it hadn't been for Thomas, I would have left a long time ago. But he had no choice. He felt sorry for Nancy. He'd grown used to her over the years. And she was a good person. Should she have given in to his entreaties and sold those stupid paintings? It was her own fault. She should have been so stubborn. A couple days passed when Clara called to say she had a plan. Frank rushed right over. "You're going to do this," the woman began. "It's your anniversary the other day. Here, Mike, give her some sleeping pills. Then put her in the car and see her at the address I'll give you. I'll meet you there." Frank did everything Clara wanted him to do. When Nancy passed out, he carried her to the car and drove her to some abandoned house. There wasn't a soul around. Inside, Clara was already waiting for him with ropes. Together, they tied the girl up tightly and locked her in a room. In the morning they returned, horrified to find Nancy dead. This outcome partially disrupted their plans, but Clara assured them that it would not be a serious problem. She had connections through which she expected to make it look like an accident. The problem came later when they arrived and the door was open. The body was gone. Clara didn't understand how anyone could have gotten into the house. But the fact remained. They were now in a very unpleasant situation. Both of them had no idea what to do. What frightened them most of all was that the corpse had fallen into the hands of the police. But Clara argued that the chances of that happening were extremely remote. And even if it was, there was no evidence that they had anything to do with Nancy's death. At first, Frank offered to report his wife missing, but Clara demanded that he hold off. And then we got the kidnappers. You know what happened next? Frank sighed heavily. Why didn't you tell me you had a son? Nancy asked. Do you think I would have acted like a brute? What would you have done? Pat me on the head. It's treason, Mother. Of course, I wouldn't have been happy about it. But I loved you, and I knew you wanted a child. It could always have been amicable. What are you talking about? It's easy to talk about it now, when it's already happened. You'd have just thrown me out of the house and left me penniless. Even so, Nancy argued. But is that any reason to decide to commit a crime? You know me well. I don't leave my loved ones in distress. If you talked to me, I'd have given you a couple of those ill-fated paintings just to get you out of my life forever. What's the use of talking about it now? Frank said sorrowfully. You can't undo what you've done, Nancy. I'm really sorry about what happened. If I had the chance to make it right, I would have done everything in my power. And what happens now? Now you're going to be arrested, Peter said calmly. You realize that even after a confession, you can't just let it go. Of course, it all depends on Nancy whether she'll claim an attempt on her life, robbery, and all that. But I'd do my best to punish you, Valerie. You questioned the life of another human being, driven by your greed. I am willing to be punished, nodded Frank. Just please don't hurt Clara. She has a small child. Thomas won't survive on his own. How's that working out? With one eyebrow raised, Peter asked, According to you, this woman is to blame for everything. And now you want her to get away with it. And in the bank, she was the person who took the paintings from the vault. No, Frank, it doesn't work that way. She's the mastermind. She's not going to get away with it. Then we can make it look like I forced her to do it. You see, I have to spend the next few years in prison anyway. Thomas will have no one to take care of him. I am taking care of him. Nancy suddenly blurted out, which raised Frank's eyebrows. What do you mean, you? You can't stand children. Why would you do all that? And why would you care about the child of someone who almost took your life? It's called humanity, Frank, sighed Nancy. I have enough money to take care of the child until his parents are released. I'm not going to claim him, but I agree to be a guardian. In spite of everything, I don't want to ruin anyone's fate. But I can't let this woman go free without realizing the consequences of her actions. Thank you, Frank said only. After these words, the operatives came out of the room and charged Frank. They had his full confession in their hands. The man obediently put up his hands to have the handcuffs snapped on him. The investigation lasted 4 months. Frank and Clara were charged with fraud and grand larceny, attempted sale of stolen property. Nancy decided not to report her kidnapping after all, even though Peter tried to insist otherwise. Peter, she persuaded him. Look, it didn't work out, all right? They're already facing a lot of jail time for the paintings. There'll be time to think about everything they've done. It's up to you, of course. The man shook his head. But I think a criminal should be punished for his actions. That's exactly what they did. It didn't work out. So in fact, there were no actions. I forgave them, and I drove them to despair. I should have just left him when I realized that he wanted a child, and I didn't. Kept spoiling his life. I feel sorry for that woman. Honestly, I do. I'm not excusing her. She's punishing herself more than our law can do. She's condemned herself to be separated from the son she loves. How much do you think they'll get? Well, with a plea of cooperating, I'm thinking 5 to 6 years. If they behave, they could get out early. You're seriously considering taking custody of Thomas. Of course, I promised. A child shouldn't have to suffer for the sins of his parents. And I'd rather have him than in an orphanage. Frank and Clara have reached a verdict. Both of them, as Peter said, were sentenced to 5 years imprisonment in a general security colony. Nancy returned to her apartment, but this time not alone, but in the company of a little boy. Thomas was 3 years old. He was already talking well. Nancy was even surprised at how connected the child's sentences were. She furnished a nursery for the baby and put him in kindergarten. Every day she took him to the nursery before work and picked him up afterward. Very soon she became very attached to the child. Without realizing it, Peter often came to visit. He said that the kid should see a man in front of him. As an example, she only spoiled him a lot. The girl argued, but realized that Peter was right. Sometimes they went together to James's, where Thomas found a wonderful friend in the person of good-natured Benedict. A close spiritual bond developed between the boy and the cat. Nancy was preparing for New Year's Eve with little Thomas, and they went to the mall to buy gifts and Christmas toys. Nana, Thomas addressed her. For some reason, he had nicknamed Nancy that and stubbornly refused to change his habit. "We'll buy a cake. Do you want cake, honey?" Nancy smiled. "Sure, we'll get cake and tangerines and colored balloons. And then you and I will go to the Christmas tree market." "Hooray!" shouted the joyful boy. "Christmas tree, have you asked Santa for a present yet?" Nancy asked the boy. "Yes." Squinting his eyes, the little boy answered. "And what, I wondered, did you ask him for?" "I won't tell," Tom replied stubbornly. "Well, tell me." Nancy patted him by the hood. "I promise I won't tell anyone." Honest. More honest than an honest puppy. Thomas said this with his lips pressed together and stared at the floor in silence. A puppy. Nancy was surprised. A real one. Sniffled the child. "Don't you think the puppy will freeze while Santa Claus is bringing it from the North Pole to you? He's got a fur coat, a warm nanny." "And that's right," smiled Nancy. Of course, a dog was not part of her plans, but for some reason she wanted to fulfill the boy's wish. Having collected a whole mountain of purchases, they went to the Christmas tree market. To Nancy's surprise, there was James, who was also buying a Christmas tree. "Nancy," the man greeted her. "What a meeting. I see you're getting ready for the holiday too. We're going to buy the biggest tree we can," Tima proclaimed. "Like this one." "Wow, serious plans," laughed the man. He helped his friends choose a tree and load it into the car. "How about we all celebrate New Year's Eve together?" "Yay," Thomas rejoiced. "On it, we're going." "It's kind of embarrassing." Nancy was embarrassed. "Nancy, why are you embarrassed?" James asked. "We're not strangers. Both Peter and I would be very happy. Don't say no." "All right," agreed the girl. She was glad that these men, who had become part of her life under such dubious circumstances, had not left it, even when it was over. On New Year's Eve, she pulled up to the James house with the one and only. Taking gifts of groceries out of the trunk, she handed the boy a dressed-up box so that he could personally present his gift to his beloved grandfather. Thomas personally chose what to give James. It was a funny Christmas sweater that immediately caught the child's attention in the store. But she asked Nancy would Grandpa like it. Of course he would. She hastened to reassure the child. "It was you who chose it, you say," the child suddenly added. "Mommy and Daddy are coming too." The question stumped Nancy with the topic rarely asked about his parents. The boy was told that they had to go away for work, but would be back very soon. But it was noticeable that the child missed them a lot. Although Nancy tried to do her best to divert his attention, the door was opened by Peter. It was noticeable that the man was very happy to see the guests. Together, they walked into the beautifully decorated living room, in the center of which was a huge Christmas tree. Tom immediately rushed to look at the toys in the company of his favorite cat. "And we have presents," Nancy said cheerfully. "James, these are for you." The girl handed the owner her box, and the subject quickly ran up to give his gift as well. Yes, this is for you." The boy was literally glowing with happiness. When James took out of the box a brightly colored sweater from the snowman, he laughed for a long time, but immediately went to change clothes. "This is for you, Peter." Nancy smiled shyly, handing the man a brightly colored package. Inside was a kaleidoscope. What a thing! Peter marveled, and laughing. We together with the theme chose not the most serious gift, even children's I understand. But for some reason it seemed to me that it is the one that will give you bright emotions. All the more difficult to give a man something really necessary. Nancy, this is a wonderful gift. Imagine, I had one just like it when I was a kid, but small. I used to play with it a lot, especially when I was sad. I don't know how you came to buy it. But I'm very glad, really, the girl smiled. Clean, nodded Peter. And I've got something for you too. He took from the shelves a large box, in which Nancy found a bracelet of surprising beauty. Jesus, Peter, it's so expensive. Are you out of your mind? What are you talking about? It's a gift. Please don't make me feel guilty. I took so long to pick it out. I really like it. Let's put it on right now. Peter clasped the clasp on her slim found wrist, and the piece looked even better. Nancy blushed thickly. Alice insisted that the wedding be organized in nature. They put up tents everywhere, hung garlands of flowers and lights. There were not many guests, but the company was very friendly. A small orchestra was invited. Live music created a surprisingly relaxed atmosphere. Immediately after the registry office, the newlyweds arrived at the glade prepared for the celebration. Nancy wore a stunningly beautiful dress, a tiara in her hair, and a bracelet on her wrist, given to Peter on New Year's Eve. From that very day, the girl did not part with the jewelry, considering it a personal lucky. In the summer, Alice prepared a wonderful holiday. Guests danced, enjoyed treats, the patronage of which was taken by James. He sweetly with the guests, talking about his culinary secrets. The girls literally clung to the charming chef. During the time during which Thomas went to the daycare center, Nancy managed to make friends with many moms whose children went to the same group. Some of them she was happy to invite to the wedding, because now they had so many common themes. Contrary to her expectations, motherhood was not as overwhelming a task as she had always thought. Of course, Nancy realized that Tema was not her son. But thanks to this boy, she was able to accept the responsibility she had always dreaded. It seemed terribly foolish to her, even now, the fury with which she had persuaded her ex-husband that children were unnecessary. It was all the fault of banal fear. But as they say, you can't beat a wedge. When Thomas came into our lives, there was no turning back. She always honored the commitments she made. It wasn't long before she realized that a baby wasn't the scariest thing on the planet, and when it became clear to her that it was possible to have a constructive dialogue with him. Then it became clear that motherhood is also very interesting. Thomas grew up very quickly. The boy was already 4 years old. He was getting bigger and smarter. Peter thought it was right to teach him to read. Very soon it became clear that the child showed great interest in the new hobby. Then Nancy decided not to stop there and gave him to an English learning group for preschoolers. And there Thomas did not fail. The girl was glad that her boy is developing so rapidly. Alas, as much as she wanted to, the boy was still not hers. Sometimes Nancy had fits of unbearable longing. She realized that in a few years Tema's real parents would return and the child would have to be given away. But for the time being, she didn't want to think about it at all. The newlyweds went on a wedding trip together with Thomas. James volunteered to babysit. He told the newlyweds to think about nothing and enjoy themselves. And so they did. 2 months later, Nancy realized she was pregnant. At first, she was wildly frightened when the gynecologist confirmed her fears. The girl sat in confusion, looking at one point on the wall. "Will you keep it?" the doctor asked dryly. "What?" Nancy asked again. "I'm asking. Do you plan to keep the baby?" "Of course," the girl answered, not very confidently. "It's just that you look so confused. That's why I'm asking." "First pregnancy." "Yes," nodded the bewildered Nancy. "But it's no big deal. Now, then we'll put you on the registry. All that remains is to wait." "Thank you," she muttered and left the office. She didn't dare to dial Peter for a long time. Somehow it happened that they had never brought up the subject of a child. Peter remembered perfectly well what his wife's unwillingness to have children had brought him to. He already had a teenage son, so the question was not as acute as it had been with Frank. Everyone was already used to Thomas as if he were his own child. "Sashenka." Nancy spoke to her husband in a trembling voice when he answered the phone. Yes, darling, your voice is shaking. Is everything all right? Worried Peter. Don't worry, everything's fine. Nancy hastened to reassure him, but for some reason she herself cried. Nadia, what's wrong with you? I can hear you. Are you crying? Well, speak quickly. Peter, please come and pick me up. I'm texting you the address right now. Sure, Tuck. Just don't cry so fast. Peter wasn't fooled. 10 minutes later, he was there. Hope sat on the bench looking resolved. He came over to his wife and sat next to her. Well, tell me, what happened? In a serious tone, he began. Peter, still in a trembling voice, answered Nancy, You and I are going to have a baby. The man at first thought he had misheard. So sudden and unexpected did this news seem to him. Then he realized that his wife was serious. He jumped up from the bench and scooped Nancy up in an armful, surrounding her. Is it true? With burning eyes, he asked, looking at the confused Nancy. On the face of it, so don't say anything. I can see by your silly look that it's all pure truth. Nancy laughed and cried at the same time. She felt so at ease in this man's arms, and she realized that he was the one who was to be the father of her child. Peter, she whispered, is this really happiness?
Subscribe and click the bell.
She's so uncomplicated. Ethan smiled, and his smile was surprisingly gentle and dreamy. Who? John wondered. They were in a nightclub, but the loud music didn't stop them from talking. Separate rooms with excellent noise insulation were provided for solvent clients. The guys were not just solvent clients, but also regular and very generous with tips. Therefore, this small but very cozy office with panoramic windows and a mirror ceiling was, you could say, assigned to them. So who's the uncomplicated one? Ethan snapped out of his dreamy reverie and for some reason whispered, Slaga, she is such a... Listen, I honestly haven't met anyone like her. Her father owns a tire shop, a businessman, a hard worker, and the girl is not spoiled by life at all. I asked her where she likes to vacation. So she told me, you know what she said? You won't believe it. She says that at the cottage father says fishing, and they then from this fish caught, food cooked, fry it, and with boiled potatoes eat and soup still. Liar. John stared at me. You're a fool. She's playing a joke on you, and you believe it. What kind of girl would have fun like that, as if she's already retired? That's ridiculous. No, wait, I see what's going on. Where's their summer house? Did you ask? Maybe in Cyprus, maybe. No. It's just a little tree, 40 miles out of town, inherited from my grandparents. And that's where he and his daddy have their place of power. They go fishing, pick mushrooms, berries. Listen, she can make jam, and she dries mushrooms and pickles them. What a great girl! She says she starts her mornings with exercise and douses herself with cold water to avoid getting sick. No, but have you ever seen such girls? Not in the movies, but for real. Everybody else has a fitness center and a personal trainer and a healthy diet, and she's exercising in cold water. Aha! And fried fish and chips, plus jam. You're looking for exotic, aren't you? John asked me glumly. I don't even want to ask where you found it, but I'll advise you as a friend. Get rid of her before it's too late. You don't know these country girls, and they're clutching, she'll grab you and that's it. You won't realize how married you'll be, and then you won't get divorced. She'll grab everything she can reach, and you'll be left without pants. Oh, come on, don't make me sad. Ethan grinned. You haven't seen her, Clara. She's like a Cinderella, friendly, kind, and good at everything. Her eyes are like this, and all the time she seems to be surprised. I'll order her a coffee and a cake, and she'll have a happy look on her face. At the Moody's, take her hand in the dark, and she is already shining all over, and when I kissed her for the first time, I think she then even the whole night could not sleep. Knave, she's so cute and sweet, you could fall in love with her. Did you fall in love? No. Ethan wrinkled his nose and looked like a hedgehog about to sneeze, but then changed his mind. What kind of love? I've been with so many girls, I don't think I'm capable of falling in love anymore. You remember Thumbelina, don't you? I got bored beforehand. That's 100% me. And the girl? What about the girl? Well, beautiful but funny, but you'll meet another, even prettier, even funnier. If you fall in love with every girl, you won't have enough days in your life. John suddenly winked conspiratorially at his buddy. Listen, doesn't she have a girlfriend? Because you tell me so deliciously, I even thought I might be missing something in life. Jam, for example. You look for it. Ethan said arrogantly and burst out laughing. Come on, don't be so slow. Go to any cheaper club. There are 100 of them per square meter. And all hungry, you'll treat them to a cocktail and take them to your place. John remained silent, and Ethan suddenly felt sickened by his own cynicism. Ethan had been living in a sticky, sticky jam for a month now. It had started out so nice, so funny. Clara, in her colored sundresses, with her long hair and perpetually surprised look, her willingness to admire everything he said, to rejoice at any, even the cheapest gift. Ethan sometimes bought the girl the cheapest chocolates on purpose, just to test her reaction, but she was as happy about them as if she'd been given diamonds. She was so sweetly embarrassed and always asked him to turn off the lights. Every day she wished him a good morning. Yes, everything was so light, funny, plush, like a video clip of a couple in love releasing into the sky, balloons, hearts, and then, holding hands, going to an ice cream parlor. And then it happened, and I had to thrash around, twist and turn, come up with original moves, lie, lie, lie. Lying was the most painful of all. Ethan was more and more confused, with no idea how to get out of the horror that had come over him and pinned him to the ground. The horror looked exactly like the two purple stripes, parallel to each other, on a pregnancy test. It was the test that the idiotic Clara had presented to him by calling and scheduling an urgent appointment. Come right now, please, she asked. I have such news. In short, come. What's wrong? He asked, surprised. Have the aliens taken over the planet? Ethan, this is not a phone call. Come quickly. It's very important. I'm waiting for you. The girl didn't bother to explain. Ethan was very worried then. The demand, the urgency. It was something out of Clara's repertoire if she said it was urgent. Intuition, of course, was not dormant. Ethan suddenly remembered how, a couple weeks ago, he and Clara had decided to go out of town to a wild beach and had had a wonderful time there until late in the evening. They didn't even want to leave, and she fell in love with the place and kept repeating, I will live here. I like it here so much that I want to stay here forever. Ethan understood her, he wanted to, but he wanted it to be like this. Warm but not hot weather, the water glistening, and for Clara to walk around in her bathing suit, and for them to be as old as they are today, 18 and 19. He would build a shawl then, right here on top of the hill, and in the evenings they would burn fires and drink cheap sweet wine. A picture to remember. He said out loud, What is it? I want to say that I will remember this day and keep it in detail, like a photograph of you and me living here all our lives and not growing old for a minute. It's like a snapshot, only not with a camera, just with your eyes. He kept in his memory this picture of eternal summer and eternal happiness. However, there were no pharmacies nearby, but Ethan somehow hoped that it would be lucky. And if he hoped in vain, oh, not for good. All this urgency. Oh, not good. What if the wild beach left them a mark in the form off? What the hell is this? Maybe Clara just saw a cockroach and now he's afraid to move, or a mouse. He didn't notice how he accelerated his steps towards the girl's house. Whatever happened there, it was better to find out as soon as possible and not to be tormented by doubts. And maybe it would turn out that there was nothing to worry about. Maybe the girl just needs some help. You know, like move a couch. A couch would be nice. He ran up the stairs to find out, finally, what was the cause of Clara's anxiety. Here's already her floor. Ethan didn't even have time to ring the doorbell. But Slaga jumped out into the entryway in a bathrobe, clutching in her fist a strip of paper with 2 dashes on it. Ethan tried hard not to think about where the test had been before it was picked up. Look, look! The girl shrieked, smiling so contentedly that Ethan immediately wanted to run away. Of course, Clara, with her usual stupidity, didn't notice anything and kept shoving the object of her idiotic pride under his nose. Well, what to do now? I wonder what kind of reaction she expects. That he, too, would jump with delight, pick her up in his arms and start twirling her around? Or fall to his knees and start kissing her still flat belly like in the movies? Yeah, a bad movie. Ethan, what's wrong with you? Is that your face? You're not happy. She finally figured it out. I should be happy. But are you happy? It's our baby, yours and mine. Isn't it great? Yours is. Ethan blurted out the first thing that came to his mind. But as for me, that's a moot point. He knew he was saying a nasty, insulting thing. He knew that Clara didn't deserve them, but he was saying them, and now, at this very moment, he wanted them to be true. How do I know? Maybe I wasn't your only one. You didn't swear fidelity to me, did you? Maybe you were seeing someone else at the same time. I wouldn't be surprised at all. How? How? Why? Because. Do you have proof that you didn't go out with someone else? That you only went out with me? No? Well, I don't have any proof either. So why should I believe you? The girl's huge eyes instantly filled with tears. Ethan, look. There's 2 stripes, that means. I know what it means without you telling me. It's okay, it happens. But what does that have to do with me? Who else? Ethan, what's wrong with you? I'm not with anyone else. Here's a test. Check it out. Don't give me that test. I've seen it. I'm not interested in what it says, Ethan. He asked, squeamishly pulling away. Well, where? Show me. Clara slammed her eyes shut resentfully. A crystal tear ran down her rounded cheek, her eyes large, open, amber-colored. At first, they seemed childishly enthusiastic and naive. Where had it all gone? It was as if the enchantment had dissipated in an instant, leaving only the surprise of his own blindness. Where was he looking before? Naivety, delight. Now he realized it was not enthusiasm, but elementary stupidity. Too bad it was too late for him. I had no one else. The girl whispered in a trembling voice. You know you haven't. How would I know that? Ethan started up. Do you think I've been following you? I mean, who else could have been involved? I'm just saying. You go to the doctor for an abortion. If there's anything there, you have to pay. Fine, I'll pay. But then we break up because I don't want to do it again. Especially from a girl I've never been sure of. You'll get pregnant again, and then you'll want to pin it on me. No way. To the doctor, there was a voice from behind the door. She's going to register to observe the pregnancy. Who the hell is that? The boy was confused. The door of the apartment opened, and Ethan saw a man in old sweatpants on the doorstep. Apparently, this character was the future grandfather of the two stripes and the daddy of the dopey, blissful one. In addition to the pants, the man was dressed in a shedding t-shirt, which favorably emphasized his emerging potbelly. His vast baldness was a strange contrast to his thick, dark mustache. His gaze was ferocious, a real monster. "Good evening, young man." The monster said hello politely and without any transition, grabbed Ethan by the shirt on his chest and pulled him closer. "It's going to kill him." The boy thought and squeezed his eyes shut just in case. "Definitely will. My name is Christopher." The monster growled, breathing in the guy's face. His breath smelled of fish and something else alcoholic. Beer, probably. "Ethan," the boy wheezed. The shirt on his chest pulled taut and rattled threateningly. "Nice to meet you," continued the monster who called himself Christopher, continuing the conversation. "As you may have already guessed, I am Clara's father. Before you say anything in your defense, I feel it is my duty to inform you that I will not tolerate rudeness." This almost refined politeness, combined with the creepy paw rubbing his shirt and the horrifying face in close proximity to Ethan's face, had a paralyzing effect. The guy didn't dare open his eyes, and he didn't even think about trying to break free. "If you hurt her, you hurt me, and it's dangerous to hurt me," growled the monster. "And now a second warning. You will marry my daughter, because my grandson must be born in a legal marriage. Maybe you have not yet had time to propose marriage, Clara, as befits a decent man. Well, now is the time to do it now. That's what you were going to do, like a real man, not a trashy little bastard, right? Am I right? Am I right?" With each new phrase, the monster shook the guy vigorously. "You're right. Yes, yes, of course. That's a smart boy." Christopher, unclasping at last his mighty hand, carefully smoothed Ethan's shirt and patting him paternally on the cheek. "Because if you had been a shameless scoundrel, capable of abandoning a pregnant woman, I would have made a cutlet of you and fed you to my dog. And now I dare not disturb you anymore." The monster smiled and disappeared behind the door. Ethan slid along the wall and sat down on the floor. "Is your father crazy?" he asked. "Or does he always act like that? Or only with guests?" The girl glanced at the door and pressed her finger to her lips. "Speak quietly." "Daddy's hearing is phenomenal. He can hear everything through 3 doors. You'd better be quiet. We're getting married then." Ethan mumbled and covered his face with his hands. It's a nightmare. It was impossible to believe what was happening. The next day, Christopher personally drove the couple to the marriage ceremony and made sure that the applications were written in the proper form and accepted as they should be. At the same time, he kept glancing at Ethan as if he expected the groom to run away or act crazy. "Clara said you're not a poor guy. He said it after the applications were filed. Of course, it's good to have something to live on while my wife is at home with the baby. Well, how are you doing? What do you do for a living?" "Where? Nothing," mumbled the guy. "Work is bad now. They pay me a trifle everywhere." Christopher nodded. "That's true. But no one ever got rich on a paycheck like that. You should try to organize something yourself." "All right, it's solvable, but what do you live on?" "My parents give me a little. They've got." "Well, I see. Don't go on." The future father-in-law waved away. "Well, Clara?" He looked at his daughter. "Congratulations. You found yourself a lazy man with an ego and a slacker. And this daughter," Christopher unceremoniously pointed his finger at Ethan. "This one, look closely, is your future husband. What do you think of that?" Well, the girl lowered her eyes. Things are different now, aren't they? Right, Ethan. He's a family man now. I think he'll be able to work and provide for me and the baby. You think so? Dad grinned. Well, think. It's my business, but if you want to know what I think, I'll tell you this. This Major doesn't like to work and doesn't know how to work. If he could do something, he wouldn't be on his parents' back. And if he didn't know how to do something, but he loved it, he'd be trying to learn something. But that was before, Daddy, and now. He doesn't love you either. Christopher went on. And his father is, I apologize, like a pig, a snow-white swan. Come on, Dad, shut up. You asked for my opinion, so stay out of my way. And here's my advice to you, my daughter. Send him away. Right after the baby's born, he's no use to you and won't be. This way you'll have a child in marriage, and you'll get rid of the stone around your neck. Girl, you're beautiful, you're smart. You'll find yourself a nice guy with a head and a heart. And this one, he glanced contemptuously at Ethan. He'll never be a man again. He's all right on the face, handsome, but there's nothing good about him except his face. The face changes with time. Ethan gritted his teeth. He's in trouble. Now this car mechanic with 3 grades of education is going to sit there and insult him. Dad, don't, asked Clara, pointing her eyes at the groom. It's unpleasant for him. And in general, of course, you have a lot of life experience, but maybe you're wrong. But it's unlikely. Can I, said Ethan, who up to this moment had been gloomily silent, stop insulting me. I'm your daughter's fiancé and the father of your grandson. Who gave you the right to behave like this? Nobody yet. If you want to prove your worth, get a job. Think about a place to live. And by the way, start taking care of your fiancé. She's pregnant. She needs rest, proper nutrition, light emotions. The doctor said Clara needs fruit and vitamins. Go and think about it and get her that. For starters, the next day, Ethan was walking through the yard of his fiancé's house and could not answer himself the question, what was he doing here? A heavy bag of fruit and vitamins for Clara was weighing down his arm. Humanitarian aid for pregnant fools and very heavy. Christopher opened the door for him himself and held out his hand for the bag. Did you bring fruit? Good for you, come on. Clara is not at home now. I sent her to the cottage in the morning. Let her get some fresh air. She'll be back on Thursday. I'll tell her you came by. Ethan was not invited to come in, and he remained standing, staring dumbfoundedly at the cheap sodden door. Why am I here? Again he asked himself, but there was no definite answer to that question. Most likely because not to come to leave Clara, no matter how stupid she was, would be to agree with the characterization that this disgusting type, her father, had given him. And also because he was scared. This really Christopher, a man without a tower, such a man will unscrew his head and then surrender to the authorities, but only unscrewed, it is no longer screwed back in place. Screw it all and skip town right now. And then what? Daddy has long ago and quite unambiguously made it clear to his children that either after receiving a certificate of higher education, they stay to work at his company, or they cannot count on the inheritance and at least some financial support. This means that to run away is like agreeing to a miserable existence, to be lost on the streets, and to fend for themselves. Ethan shakes his head, as if he hoped to shake her out of her fears and any other unnecessary thoughts. I had to think of some way out of this, and as soon as possible. But, as it turned out, no reasonable ideas appeared, and it was clear that he could not do without his sister's advice. Clara stood at the window. watching Ethan nervously pacing the sidewalk in front of the house, probably thinking about something and certainly nervous. "He sent you some fruit," my father shouted from the room. "I left it on the table in the kitchen." "And why did you deceive him that I'm at the cottage?" asked the girl. "I heard." Christopher stood on the threshold of the room, leaned his shoulder against the jamb, and looked intently, very seriously at his daughter. "I wanted to buy you some time," he said, "for you to think calmly whether you want him or not. You see what he's like. He's neither fish nor flesh. A slug. Then why did you ask him to marry you?" "I pressured him, of course. I couldn't listen to him go on and on about you. But tell me something. Do you really want to marry him, that lazy bum? A child without a husband isn't very nice, but if you look at it another way, maybe it's better to have no husband than that dry fruit of yours." "I love him," I confessed. "You love him, of course. It's understandable. While you were dating, hugging, kissing, all was well with you, but it's the same for everyone until there are no responsibilities, no children. He's a handsome guy, looking in love, holding your hand, talking nicely. Love, carrots, all those beautiful things. And how did things get complicated? So where did it go, his love?" "I heard everything." "He didn't tell you, Clara. Even though we didn't plan it, we'll get through it and I'll be with you, no matter what you decide, did he?" "He didn't, did he?" "No. He started talking about how the baby might not be his and other nasty stuff that made me want to throw up. And I'm not squeamish. I was. So let me ask you a different question. Will you have something to love him for when the passion passes, and it will pass? Can you believe me? There will remain the character of a man, his deeds, for what you can respect. You can despise, you can love, and you can hate. Will there be something to love him for then?" Clara lowered her head and bit her lip. "Daddy, she said after a short silence. "I don't know now. Ethan was the prince from the TV series. Tall, slender, dark-eyed in his movements, the lightness of a predator and the fluidity of water flowing from one position to another as naturally, easily, beautifully as if a river were flowing. And his speech was like a river, as smooth, unhurried, and sometimes like a noisy stream. Clara thought he must smell of water. Fresh, clean, fresh from the spring, but it was the opposite. When she hugged Ethan, she could always smell the woods, resin and herbs and something else, but it was so intoxicating that it seemed impossible to break the embrace. To stand like this, pressed together, and breathe in the smell of my beloved. Inhale it and do not stop, do not get distracted. You're a river, and it smells like a real forest. She used to say, "Why a river? I don't know. They say I'm a river, but I'm not." But you didn't. You're like a river. You've come into my life and filled it all with you. So you're a river? No, I'm just yours. How many of these conversations have they had? How many unbreakable embraces? How can you forget that now? And now Ethan was nothing like his recent self. Where did he get all this insolence, meanness, anger? The way he kept saying he didn't know if she'd been faithful to him or if she'd gone out with others, as if she could look at others. She didn't notice anyone but him. Clara still loved him, but realized more and more clearly she loved her memories of Ethan and the real him she didn't know at all. She doesn't want to know. I don't want to be a daddy. I don't want to be a daddy. Ethan kept repeating himself. With each word he banged his head against the soft back of the chair. Nancy was quietly looking at her fresh manicure and didn't seem to notice what was happening. She was silently worrying about when her brother would finally calm down enough to talk to her. Ethan groaned for a few more minutes, then lifted his head. Why don't you say something?" He asked in a perfectly normal voice. "Don't you see your brother's life is a disaster? You could have said something, consoled him, given him some advice." Nancy shrugged her shoulders. "Ethan, you're a fool." Aphoristically, she said. "It's pretty clear," he said. "What do we do now? That gastropub has a crazy daddy. He'll kill me, and he won't regret it. You. Is that how you talk about the girl you love?" "I never loved her." Ethan moaned. "She's cute, she's pretty, and I got carried away for a while." "But what kind of love? You have to pay for pleasure." Nancy said admonishingly, "As for everything else, however, for stupidity, for ignorance, for beauty and talent. But pleasure usually costs more than anything else." "Thank you for the informative lecture." The brother bowed. "But what should I do, huh? So I don't have to go back to it." The sister began slowly, looking up at the ceiling. "I warned you that your games in bad neighborhoods to the suburbs and affairs in bedroom communities will not lead to good. But since you didn't listen to me, and you—" She pointed her finger at her brother. "You didn't. Now we need to find out what options we have to solve the problem. The first option is to offer the girl money for an abortion and make sure she gets proper care and maintenance. Dad, tell her that horror, spontaneous miscarriage, but you will cope. You can overcome this grief together, supporting each other." "You don't know that fool, Clara." Ethan said glumly. "There's no way she's going to go along with this. People like her have only one goal in this life, to have a bunch of children like a pig and sit among them contentedly while a man works for her and all this litter. So this option is out." Nancy stated nonchalantly. "Let's move on to the second option. It's simpler, but also more complicated. Say it. Leave everything as it is and raise the child together." "Wow. One option is better than the other. Do you have any other interesting ideas?" "A third option. I haven't thought of a third one yet. Maybe I should just drop off the radar," sorely suggested the guy. "Why?" "It's quite possible. Just change your phone number, leave, and that's it. There'd be no place for us to cross paths with her then. He grinned. "We'll be on different paths. And her dad's a crazy tire man. He won't be able to find me." Nancy shook her head. "No, my dear brother, that won't do. I won't say the platitudes about the fact that if you do, you'll lose your father's financial support in no time. That's half the trouble, if you ask me. Money can be earned. The trouble is, you're incapable of taking care of yourself. And do you know why?" "And why is that?" asked my brother. "Because the created problems need to be solved, and you just want to merge quietly, disappear. Yes, almost all men do that." Ethan was indignant. "You'd think. And that's why they almost all lie as they have to." The girl said, "They work for miserable wages, live in shanty towns, and in the evenings drink the cheap liquor they're sold under the guise of beer. That's pretty much all of yours. You want to be like that." "What's that got to do with it?" "It's got everything to do with it." Nancy sighed. "That it's not those who run away from problems who live well, but those who aren't afraid to face them. Those who solve them. You have a problem, and you want to run away from it. In that case, how long after you get your inheritance will you be on the street? If, of course, you get it at all, and not crawl back under your parents' wing after you've been fired for stupidity from your supermarket cashier position." "Inheritance." Ethan grumbled. "What's there to talk about now? Dad's health is good." "That's fine. It seems to be as far away from the inheritance as the moon. But it'll come sooner or later. And frankly, I wouldn't want you to give up your share and then settle down to support me," said the sister. There was so much cold certainty in her tone that Ethan felt uneasy. Nancy was, unlike her brother, the pride of the family, a strategist's mindset, independence, the ability to make quick decisions and put them into action, and a persistence so persistent that God forbid she should dream of it. A robot, not a woman. Ethan joked, but deep down he admired his sister. That's why he ran to her for advice whenever he had the slightest difficulty. Usually she managed, thinking quickly, assessing the situation correctly, and giving excellent advice. But today, it seemed that even Nancy could not give him any advice, but she spurred his own imagination. "You're a good girl, sister," he said and clapped his hands together. "I think I've figured out what to do." The beer was disgustingly diluted. Ethan forced himself to swallow what was already in his mouth, but he set the mug aside. The bulky man sitting across from him was also his future father-in-law. He looked at the guy with bewilderment. "Do not like it?" he asked. "You'll have to excuse me, Christopher," replied Ethan. "You know, I'm not very good with beer." But I couldn't explain to this fat and aging man that beer was at least something you could try at Oktoberfest before it became too popular. Well, or at least in the Czech Republic. And what you can buy for pennies at the supermarket is not beer. It's rat poison. Suit yourself. He smiled. But I like to drink beer in the evening at work. You know, you get tired, so here it is. He lifted the bottle. Relaxes me, relieves stress, and puts me in a positive frame of mind. Ethan nodded politely. That's what my father says. Christopher immediately seized on the mention. He's a good man, your father, a hard worker. By the way, it's about time we got to know each other. What do you think? Because look, you and Clara are about to get married. You'll soon become parents, and we haven't even seen the matchmakers yet. It's not right. Yes? Ethan mumbled uncertainly. But, you know, we have such a family, such a... Well, family is family. The man interrupted him. Whatever they are, they're our own. You just bring them to us, and we'll make friends. Ethan was silent. You're in trouble, you idiot. You're in trouble. He should have listened to his sister, because she'd always told him to socialize with people in his own circle. And she was right on the money, you bastard. Well, what? The son of an entrepreneur. For a minute, a man with 2 higher education, who for fun is studying a 5th foreign language, may have in common with the daughter of the owner some lousy tire shop. He's just a common bastard anyway, and his daughter is the same, even if she is beautiful. Fool! Ethan berated himself for the umpteenth time this evening. If you want a taste of tart exoticism, you can have it. You know he lied, following a momentary burst of inspiration. I don't want you to meet my parents because I'm embarrassed, because they're, well, how should I put it, unusual people. Do they drink? Christopher raised his eyebrows. So, yeah, sure, it's a scary thing. But you can talk to them. If they want to quit, so I will organize treatment. I have a brother in New York just from addiction. He's a great doctor. He's got a whole clinic. Sure, yeah, I'll have to talk to them about it. Maybe they'll agree. That would be very good. It'll be fine, Ethan, as long as they want to live sober. The boy's got his head down. I'd like to postpone your acquaintance after all, especially since Clara's pregnant. Why should she go to all this trouble? She doesn't. But will they even come to the wedding? I guess they said they'd try, but they didn't make any firm promises. So we'll meet them in a week. Christopher shouted contentedly and took another big sip of his disgusting beer. The wedding was bearing down on Ethan at the speed of sound, but now he was looking forward to it. Each new day brought the lad closer to the coveted day, the release. The plan he had devised was simple and brilliantly thought out. They, that is, Both Clara and her crazy father should be disappointed in me. He informed his sister. They should realize that it's better to be a single mother than to be married to a jerk like me. With tireless energy, he invented new ways to convince the bride, especially the future father-in-law, of his repulsive nature. "When do you think you'll get a job?" Christopher snapped at him. "Your bride is not an elephant. 2 years pregnant will not walk. But I'm looking for something." Ethan turned around. "I haven't found anything yet." "All right, you'll come to my tire shop. I'll teach you everything myself. I'll pay you well. If you work well, you'll start earning well." This conversation was repeated with depressing regularity, and in the end, Ethan saw a suitable occasion to demonstrate once again his unsuitability for family life. The only thing left to do was to summon up the courage. "I don't want to work." Bluntly, he declared one day to Clara and Christopher. "Why should I? My parents still give me money, and as soon as the child is born, I will also get an allowance from the state." How much did Clara find out? But no matter how much it is, it's still money. "And when the baby grows up?" asked the girl anxiously, looking at the groom. "The allowance will end, and the older the child, the more money is needed for him. The allowance will run out, but Clara, the parents won't," Ethan assured her. "And when it ends and but so then there will be an inheritance, and not a small one. By the way, I've already decided what we'll spend it on. We'll buy a big house and rent it out. It's for passive income. You do nothing and the money drips. It's beautiful. And you and I will go to Thailand. Life is very cheap there. We'll have enough rent money for 2 people." "Why 2? What about the baby? Or don't you plan to take him with you?" "Oh, Clara," Ethan said reproachfully, "you can't just think of yourself. Where do you want to take the baby? To Thailand?" "No, you can't even ask me that. Of course, you shouldn't take the child with you. Because of the climate change, insects, kindergarten, school, medicine. In short, we'll leave him here. Let Grandma and Grandpa take care of him, and we'll go there to rest. We can come and visit once in a while." "But wait, Ethan." "Why?" Christopher stepped in. "I think it's a great plan. We can implement it. At least I'll make a man out of my grandson." "Daddy will not teach him anything good." "Right, Clara? You're starting again." Offended, Ethan said, and was silent for a long time. "That's how you try to offend me, to humiliate me." "And for what?" "Because I want to arrange everything so that Clara and the child would be happy. It's better to separate mother and child." Ethan was silent, but in his heart he felt that he had just won a small but important victory. Let them continue to think that he was a foolish, worthless, twitchy idiot from whom nothing could be expected. The next day he showed up at his fiancée's house drunk and diligently made noise in the entryway, until Christopher peeked out of the apartment and threatened to call the police. "Oh, come on, Dad." Ethan swung the bottle in a cartoonish fashion. Some of the wine spilled over his head and ran down his face. Ethan wiped away the alcohol and licked his palms. Christopher looked at him in disgust, which was exactly what the groom's script called for. "Oh," he said, smiling stupidly. "Can I call you Dad? Dad? Dad is just right. It's you." "Go home," Christopher advised him. "Go before I turn you in to the police." "So how do you go home?" Ethan was indignant. "I'm here to see my sweetheart." "Yes, Clara, yes, my little darling." Come here, come here." He pinched his bride's cheek. "I can't do anything without my Clara. I can't do anything without her, Daddy. I can't eat, I can't sleep, and I can't see you," said Christopher. "Get out, and don't you dare breathe your booze on my daughter. You'll come back when you're sober." Having waited a few more days after the drinking performance, Ethan again came to the guests and demanded a wedding present from his future father-in-law. "So you don't have to worry about what to guess. You know how they give us all kinds of awful junk, and then people agonize, they don't know where to put these gifts. So let's make a wish list, like some people do." "Do what?" "Well, wish list means wish list. The guests will familiarize themselves with it, and then everyone will decide what to give from this list, and there are only the necessary things." "I think you'll give us an apartment," he said. "But I'm telling you right away, we need a 2-room apartment, a child." "And what will your parents give?" Christopher grinned. "Maybe a summer house? You put it on your wish list. The child will need fresh air and vitamins. By the way, I've already looked at a nice cottage near the city. All communications are already pulled up, sewerage, water, electricity. There is near a pine forest, very clean air, and there is a garden, so we won't have to grow apples ourselves. Daddy?" Clara laughed, but Ethan stopped her with a gesture. "My parents will support us," he said habitually, adding a note of resentment to his voice. "Isn't that enough for you?" Christopher sighed and shook his head. "Unfortunately, yes. If they had raised you to be a man, I'd be much more grateful, honestly." "Clara," he turned to his daughter, "why do you need such a husband? Maybe you'll change your mind while there's still time." "Daddy," the girl was confused. "You wanted to have a child in marriage, didn't you?" "I did." Dad didn't disagree. "But look at him, that father. Then such a father, maybe it's better." "Clara," Ethan raised his head in offense. "Do you see what's going on here? Your father wants to separate us. Are you just going to keep quiet? Let the child grow up without a father? Because you see, Christopher, you don't like me, do you?" Clara smiled and waved her hands. "Honestly, Ethan, it seems to me that you yourself want us to break up. I just don't understand why you won't say it openly. Because your crazy dad would cut me to ribbons." Ethan thought, but he only said one thing out loud. "Don't be silly, the wedding's in a week." His sister was skeptical of Ethan's plan. It was her nature to be skeptical, she said, and she was probably right. But Ethan still believed in his own strength. Just a little more to go, just another week. They're already at their limit, barely hanging on. Just a little more patience, and the wedding day's in a week. My sister reminded me. Exactly. Ethan exclaimed happily. Exactly. That's just about the day of the wedding. And that's when I'm going to have my main gig, after which, oh, Nancy, I'm going to have such a party to celebrate my release. We'll go to the Canaries. We'll get some people together, rent a beach and party from morning till night till the ambulances come for us. Sister only gave me a sharp shoulder. Let's see if your idea doesn't fail, she snorted. Don't say gop until you've jumped over it. I've already jumped over, my dear sister. I have. Ethan laughed and hugged Nancy tightly. Clara was pensively going through the countless ruffles on her wedding dress, the dress itself hanging on its hinges on the closet door. Christopher looked into his daughter's room and sat down beside her. It's beautiful, he said, looking at the wedding dress. The ribbons, the lace. I never understood these wedding dresses. After all, for one day it is, and the wedding is off and in the closet. But beautiful. Yes, beautiful. Clara let go of the caressing fabric from her fingers and turned to her father. This is not what I dreamed of, Dad. Not at all. And now I'm looking at this dress and thinking, who am I going to wear it for? Ethan? The man felt that now the girl was ready to tell him something important, special, and kept silent, afraid to scare her mood. You know, when I met Ethan, she said slowly, I felt like I'd met some kind of fairy prince, And not just because he was handsome. He took such good care of me, drove me to school, picked me up after class, fed me at restaurants. Then we went out, went to the movies. Every day? Dad asked. Every day. And it seemed to me that it was like going to the movies. And nothing about it made you suspicious. I did. It was only a couple of weeks later that I suddenly thought, doesn't he have any business of his own? I mean, we were together all the time. From morning till night. It's like he's got no school, no job, nothing. Nothing but fun. I asked him, and he looked at me so strangely and said, I can afford to rest. But here he is all resting and resting. Father snorted. And does not get bored? Yes. And when I found out I was pregnant, I thought that now everything would change for sure. Ethan will realize that now he can't go out like he used to, thinking only about pleasures. That a child will be here soon, and that's a responsibility. You have to think about the future. But the further I go, the more I realize that he's not going to think about anything. You see the way he acts, it's like he's getting cocky on purpose. Christopher didn't know what to say. And what can you say? Clara saw and said it all herself. You can still replay everything, he said softly. Just tell that bum there's no wedding. It's my fault, too. When I found out about it, I was furious. I thought I'd do anything, and the child would be born in marriage, and then the grass would grow back. But you know how they treated it in my time. It was considered a disgrace. That's what I thought out of habit, and then I looked around and everything had changed. What's the point? Now many women give birth to children, but they're in no hurry to get married. What can you do if you're not lucky enough to have a father? We'll raise the kid, work, bring him up. You'll meet a good guy. And this one, what's he worth to you? He's a fool. If only I'd realized who he was before. Sadly, smiled Clara. And now I feel like I have to go all the way. And I keep thinking, well, at least he said that there will be no wedding, even if he refused to marry. Why wait for him to say that? My father was surprised. Can you do it yourself or not? But do you want to? I'll tell him, and I'll throw him down the stairs with my great pleasure, Dad. The wedding is the day after tomorrow, Dad, reminded my daughter. Everything is ready, money spent, invitations, restaurant. How can I cancel it all? How then to look people in the eyes? Give it up. Christopher laughed. Who cares? Changed her mind and that's it. If you don't like it, the door's over there. No, you can't do that. Can you marry a jerk? I made a mistake. What can I do? So I'll have to go all the way, said the daughter. And the father realized that no matter how much he wanted to, he couldn't change her mind. She feels sorry for her. She doesn't want to marry that Ethan of hers. She's embarrassed in front of others, but in front of herself, in front of her child. Ethan was getting ready for the wedding. He'd been shopping all day, but he hadn't found anything suitable. What kind of discrimination is this? Why aren't there stores for people who like tattered clothes? What do fashion designers care about? Are they creating some kind of fashion collection? One uglier, one uglier. And where, you may ask, are the fashion collections for the homeless, where in the end, you can get at least a homeless man's masquerade costume? Shopping had worn him out. Ethan was about to fall into despair, but then a brilliant idea struck him. Why look for special clothes? You could just make your own. A pity, of course, but what not to sacrifice for a great cause? All it takes is a little dirt. That's it. Ethan flew home on wings. Once home, he got down to business with all the imagination he could muster. First, he wet the soles of his sneakers with water and carefully walked in them over his sweater and jeans, which he spread out on the floor. The prints were quite convincing, but they weren't the only thing he could do. He found some pistachio ice cream in the fridge and smeared it on his jeans and sweater. Then Ethan poured some instant coffee into a jar and poured it on his sweater. His jeans got a few ketchup stains and a couple of greasy butter stains. Only the finishing touches remained. Ethan, armed with a pair of scissors, carefully cut the sweater along the seam and ripped off the sleeve. Then he stretched the sweater in all directions to add bagginess and was satisfied with his creation. The elegant summer sweater was now unrecognizable. The jeans were a different story. Despite the ketchup, ice cream, and butter, the stupid pants still didn't look bad enough. Ethan stomped around in his sneakers just in case, cut off the back pocket, leaving it dangling on a couple of verses, and in addition, poured a glass of water on one pant leg and poured instant coffee right on the wet spot, then began laboriously rubbing the rich coffee powder right into the fabric. It would be more expressive that way. It really did fix things. Now the pants looked just right. They looked like they'd been pulled out of a dumpster. Ethan marveled aloud, taking another critical look at his clothes. His wedding outfit was ready. Clara sat in the kitchen, melancholy, stirring the sugar in her cup. The wedding dress hung in its former place. The girl had glanced at it without interest in the morning and passed it by. "You're not dressed yet," surprised Christopher. He saw that his daughter was sitting in her pajamas, her hair gathered in a shaggy bundle, and did not even try to look at the clock. He himself had already managed to wake up, eat breakfast, and take a shower. Now he only had to get dressed and could go to marry his daughter. But only the daughter was not in a hurry. Soon the groom will come, and you are unwashed, sitting in your pajamas. How can you do that? What's the matter with you, Clara? Don't you feel well? I don't want to get married, Papa, she said, without any expression. I don't. To Ethan, no, you shouldn't marry a man like that. I only realized last night you can't. It would be a tragedy. It'd be misery, and I've got a baby to think about. Dad, can we still call it off? Isn't it too late? But you found time to change your mind. The father smiled and patted the girl's hair. Right on the day of the wedding. Well, better late than never. Your fool is coming, and you'll tell him. Or do you want me to tell him? No, Dad, don't. I'll tell him myself. I'll decide. I'll tell him myself. Clara finally looked up at her father with a tired look. I haven't slept all night. He understood. Look at the circles under your eyes. Oh, youth, youth. Don't worry, my child, he said quietly. You've made the right decision. Ethan looked at himself in the mirror again with pleasure. Perfect. He had thought of everything. Or almost everything. No, the watch had to come off. He smeared a little olive oil on his hair to make it stick together, then sprinkled it with flour. It was perfectly messy and even somewhat dusty, and the stubble on his face, which he hadn't gotten rid of in 2 days, had grown back sloppily. It remained to pay attention to his nails. The question of manicure was solved very simply. Ethan went outside and sat down on the nearest lawn, digging into the ground for a while. His sneakers, which he had also covered with earth, looked a little more civilized than necessary, and the guy got rid of the laces. Now everything was perfect. It was time to go after the bride. Just before Clara's house, Ethan stopped and took a few deep breaths and exhaled. And so the final act of the play Escape from Family Life began. An important key moment in his plan. Now it is necessary to play. Well, play brightly and even, probably brilliantly. Otherwise tonight he'll find himself a married man. The door was opened for him by Clara herself. Ethan? What's the matter with you? Clara. He howled and fell to his knees. Clara, I'm so bad, I'm worse. Clara, at least beat me. Will it make me feel better? Beat me, beat me. Ethan, calm down. What's this masquerade? She's pregnant, she can't fight. Do you want me to beat you up? Suggested Christopher, who heard Ethan's cries. Clara, get away. Let me get that slacker. But Dad, the girl was angry. You've got time for jokes. The man is so happy. Without much sympathy, said Christopher. Maybe he should call an ambulance? Clara, howled Ethan. Clara, my darling girl, my favorite, how are we going to live with you now? Daddy's broke. They took everything from us for debts, every last cent. There's no money, no real estate. They took away all the shares. We have nothing left. How are we going to live now? How can I marry you now? My beauty, my Clara, my darling, my darling, my darling. Don't be silent. Tell me something, please. Oh, the girl sighed. Thank God, honestly. What? Ethan stopped howling in surprise and raised his head. Clara, we can't get married now, can we? That's a good thing, she said sincerely. I'm sorry, Ethan. It's probably my own fault for not saying it sooner. But you realize that. What kind of family are you? You don't want it. Neither do I. What about your dad going broke? Of course he is, but maybe it's not that bad. I'm sure he's not that broke or anything. Don't you want to marry me? Ethan interrupted her. Well, yes, I don't. And it's a good thing we realized it before we got married. You don't want to marry me, he repeated, shocked. Clara sighed. I don't. I'm sorry. Ethan rose to his feet and looked at the girl resentfully. So I've been freaking out that now we can't get married. And you? Fuck you. Have a nice stay. Ethan rushed down the stairs and thought that this was it. He was running towards his long-awaited freedom, but for some reason he wasn't happy about it. Good girl, said Christopher. Well done, but don't take offense at him. It's just a slip of the tongue. Don't feel bad, baby. You did the right thing. And Ethan jumped out into the street. Without slowing down, ran away from this house, away from Clara, away from her father, away from her child. From this whole nightmare story, for which he was ashamed and for some reason also very offended. As if he had just been betrayed by his most trusted friend. Only now, when everything was behind him, he wanted to ask himself, what was so bad about marrying this sweet, loving girl? And would it have been so terrible to become a father? But it was both painful and pointless to think about it now. He had thought for too long that he was being trapped, lured like an animal into a trap, and he had been ready to do anything to break free. And now he wasn't needed, and it turned out that no one was trying to catch him. And the trap was not a trap. It's he himself made up a hell of a lot of things. But what about it now? What's the point? He ran along the asphalt path, and it seemed that this run could go on, if not forever, then for many, many millennia. Ethan never tired and never wanted to stop, ever. Maybe one day he would collapse from fatigue somewhere in Cambodia, but that would be later, when he was exhausted. Only then, and not before. But this time life decided everything for him. A persistent phone call made him stop. What? Ethan bellowed into the receiver. It was Nancy. Her sister, which was absolutely unbelievable, was sobbing at the top of her voice. What are you crying about? I can't understand a word you're saying. Ethan, come at once. Dad was in an accident. He wasn't saved. Can you hear me? Where is he now? Is he in the hospital? Is he in surgery right now? Do you need anything? How about blood? We're the same type. Ethan, Nancy screamed. "Dad's dead. He's dead, you know." "You're lying," whispered Ethan. "You're lying. Aren't you, Nancy?" "I don't believe you. I don't believe you. I don't believe you." He shouted so loudly that an elderly woman with a dog on a leash, passing by, flinched and stepped away. "I don't believe you." Ethan shouted, "I don't believe it. You're lying." "Nancy, I don't believe you." But he did. Nancy wouldn't joke like that. He knew it. "I'm on my way to the lineup," said the sister through her tears. "You come too." "I can't on my own." "Come, I'm waiting for you, Ethan." "Will you come?" "I'll come," he whispered. I'll come right now. The rest of it went on like an endlessly sad movie, and everything Ethan remembered was somehow very vague. No matter how hard Ethan tried, he couldn't remember how he'd gotten a cab and gotten to Nancy. He only remembered calling his sister from the car and trying to find out where he was going and where she was waiting for him. And Nancy was sobbing, mixing up addresses, couldn't remember anything. Then she handed the phone to someone and the address was found. Ethan found her almost unconscious, sedated. He had to identify his father's body. Ethan had heard that morgues could be cold, but for some reason he felt neither cold nor warm or anything. His father lay covered with a sheet, and when Ethan looked at his face, he saw almost no damage. That pleased him for some reason. Why? He couldn't remember that either. Maybe he just didn't want his father's face to be disfigured. The funeral, another moment of reverence, lingered in his memory. Ethan only remembered that his sister, despite her grief, had been able to pull herself together fairly quickly and had looked solemnly calm at the funeral, standing at his father's coffin. Ethan was not calm, and he was not calm either. He couldn't make himself feel anything, nothing at all, as if all his emotions had been numbed or taken away at once. He kept watching his father's coffin being lowered into the ground, and only one question kept him in suspense. Why? Why did his father need money? Why had he worked so hard to earn it? Why? Why did he hardly ever leave work? Why did he work like a slave in the galleys? What was it all for if it was all over in an instant? Only now Ethan realized that he had always thought that money could protect him from something. I guess it could, but all the money in the world couldn't stop a truck from going into the oncoming lane. Well, that's just how it is. Ethan couldn't get that thought out of his head. And then, sitting next to his sister at the reading of the will, it all became so unimportant. The money, the share in the business, the stock. What did it matter now? He thought about whether his father had time to look up at the sky. How often did he go out with friends? How many times have he sat on the ocean and watched the fiery, tropical sun sink in? Had he ever even seen the ocean? Or had he never had time to go on vacation? Somehow, that was all that began to matter. Nothing else. Hey, he looked up. Nancy, did you say something? I couldn't hear. You know, it doesn't matter though. Nancy. Ethan put his hand on his sister's shoulder. I want to give up my share of the inheritance in your favor. What? She was confused. What are you saying? Dad made a will for both of us, and you're saying you want to give up everything. Why? Of the two of us. He smiled. You're the one who's always smarter, more responsible. You're determined, strong. You won't let the cause to which our father devoted his whole life go to the wind. And that's why I want you to have it all. It's only fair and just. You should give it to someone who can hold it together and grow it. Not a schmuck like me. I'd really spend it all in a year and end up with nothing. That'd be okay, but I feel sorry for my dad. He put his whole life into this. There's just one thing I'd like to ask you. It's about Clara. I'm not gonna say anything in front of strangers right now. I'll text you, okay?" Nancy covered her eyes for a second, then wiped away a tear with her handkerchief. "What about you?" she asked quietly. "What are you going to do? Ethan?" He shrugged. "Me, I'll watch the sky, the sunsets. I'm leaving, sis. There's nothing more for me to do in this town." He squeezed the girl's shoulder lightly and walked out into the street. The whole world was waiting for him now. For a brief moment, Ethan wanted to go over to Clara's house to say goodbye to her, but he shouldn't have. He managed to realize something about himself. His father lived for work, and he, Ethan, could stay here and live for the child, but he shouldn't do that. There was nothing he could do. Everything in their family, the truest of naturals, fans. Dad and Nancy are work fans, and Ethan, he's a fan of freedom. And that's probably better than being a fan of parenting. It's bound to break the kid. No better to watch the sunset. He went to the ticket counter and asked for a one-way ticket. "Where to?" they asked him. "Anywhere." "Wait for me, though. Anywhere to the ocean, and preferably south." Ethan stepped off the airplane straight into paradise. At least this place looked a lot like it. Tall palm trees waved in the wind, their huge leaves wreathed in opahalas. A wonderful fragrance of flowers wafted in the air. In the distance, but still close, the ocean offered its waters to the sun. The speech of the passers-by was more like the chirping of birds in the morning spring. "No luggage, sir?" Someone addressed him in passable English. "I don't need it." Ethan smiled. The joy, the fullness of life, made him want to sing. Never before in his life had he felt so free. He had a little money. Enough to eat twice at any of the local cafes. And beyond that, he was too lazy to think about it. Tomorrow seemed so far away. There would be a day, there would be food. He went forward, not choosing the road. All paths here would sooner or later lead to the ocean. Nancy had no difficulty in finding Clara's address. She had arrived there in the morning to be sure to find her brother's ex-fiancé at home. She looked at her guest with a noticeably rounded belly, a little plump and surprised. "So it is you, Ethan's sister?" she asked at last. "How odd that you don't look like him at all." "Unfortunately, you're right, Clara." Nancy smiled. "Not in appearance, not in character, not in content. But that's not why I came here. I know my brother well, Clara, and I know that Ethan is, well, to put it mildly, not the most responsible person in the world. That's just the way he is, despite his many virtues. But I'm not a stranger to his child, and I'm his own aunt. And if you don't mind—" "Oh, so you want to see the baby?" She was delighted. "Well, of course, whenever you want. What are we talking about?" "I would like not only to see, but also to take care of my nephew." Nancy corrected the girl. "To take over, so to speak, fatherly duties." "Oh, come on, really. No, please, listen to me, because it concerns the baby and his future. First of all, you, Clara, will receive a certain amount of money every month for the baby. Don't argue. Ethan, and you may not know this, has renounced his part of the inheritance in my favor. So I've decided that I'm going to dispose of it this way, with part of the money going to child support and the rest for your baby to inherit afterward. Well, in short, when his time comes to receive the inheritance, and until then I will try to see to it that the share of my nephew did not depreciate, but on the contrary, became more. I hope you won't object and argue with me. No. It is obvious to me, for example, that this is the right and just decision. You won't challenge it, will you?" "No, I know you wouldn't." "Nancy, I just wasn't ready." I understand everything you could tell me, that you're not in need, that your father will help you. But I still think it's justice. Don't deny me the chance to right my brother's wrong. I beg you very much. 8 months in the tropics will get to anyone. Ethan knew that now. Personal experience is nothing to be trifled with. Don't confuse tourism with emigration. Tourists fly in for a week's vacation, decide they're in paradise. Here, the sun is always shining and the ocean breaks its waves on the shore, and over the shore carried snow-white seagulls. For some reason, he realized now that it was time to go home. He had a sudden urge to see his sister, to see how she was doing, and to visit Clara. The baby must have been born by now, though Ethan had stopped counting the months long ago. He just lived, not caring about the numbers on the calendar or the days of the week. Sometimes hired for a paltry wage to load bananas for export. Sometimes for a bowl of food, he agreed to wash dishes in local eateries. Sometimes begging. Once even had an affair with a pretty mulatto. But alas, the passion quickly faded because they could not explain themselves to each other. Miracle Girl chattered in some unknown language and did not understand a word of English. But still their love passion allowed Ethan to live without hunger for several weeks. His beauty was a great cook, and there was always food in the house. That marvelous little girl worked in a cafe as a cook. There was a brief period in this strange life of his, full of coincidence, when Ethan got involved with a local gang, and for a while he robbed them and ran away from the police. Though, to be honest, he hadn't had to run away very often. The police here had an easy time turning a blind eye to a lot of things. If, of course, to offer the officers of the law a small cash reward, in general, it was very understandable. There were far more petty thugs than policemen in this banana paradise, and everyone wanted to live in peace. Strangely enough, Ethan liked it. At first, it even seemed that he would not part with his new friends and would eventually become the new Pablo Escobar. He was prophesied to have a great future. At first, it rounded his head and encouraged him. But then Ethan somehow got bored of it all at once. Who does not know, he may think that the life of any romantic from the big road can be anything dangerous, luxurious, frightening, saturated. But Ethan has personally experienced that even in such a profession, there is enough of its routine. One day he just left, quietly, without saying goodbye or throwing a party. His associates probably thought he'd been hit by a bullet in one of the endless street shootouts. It was a common occurrence. No one was looking for Ethan. And now he was standing on the shore, thinking that spring was probably in full swing back home, and for the first time in a long, endless time, he wanted to walk the familiar streets and hear his native speech. Yes, it was time to go back. He said to himself, it's definitely time now. If he got a job loading bananas again, he could save up for a ticket in a month. Clara was cradling her tiny son and softly singing a lullaby to him. Christopher looked into his daughter's room and looked at two of the dearest and most beloved people in the world, Clara and baby No. Nothing is more precious than this. He thought, for the umpteenth time there isn't, and there won't be. Life, ongoing, endless from father to daughter, from daughter to grandchild. Clara caught her father's gaze and smiled. He had already fallen asleep. She said in a whisper. Christopher gently took the child in his arms and moved him to the crib. Do not regret it? He asked. For what? The daughter did not understand. He did not know what to answer. Probably about everything at once. About having a baby. About Ethan not working out. Nonsense, Dad. Why should I regret it? I had such a wonderful son. And Ethan, what the hell with him? Besides, Father has noticed that you seem to have a new boyfriend. Well, you think I didn't notice the way that Doctor looked at you? I even came to see you off in person when you were discharged. You can't be fooled. Clara laughed. He's kind of looking after me, and I like him a lot too. Although, of course, it's too early to talk about something serious. What's the hurry? There's no hurry. Christopher agreed. Noah rumbled softly in the crib. Clara came over, but her father gestured for her to stop. It's all right, I'll do it. He rocked the crib quietly and sang a lullaby to his grandson. Clara looked at her father and her heart warmed. The eternal circle of life from parents to children, from children to grandchildren. And nothing is more important than that nothing. Ethan. Nancy shouted when she saw her brother on the doorstep. He was terribly overgrown, dirty, and dressed in some strange rags. A veritable shambles. But it was her brother. She couldn't help but recognize him. How I've missed you, little sister, how you've become. Nancy had clearly crossed the threshold between angular girl and young beautiful woman in a matter of months. She had put on a little weight, but it suited her remarkably well. Her cheeks, shoulders, and breasts had plumped up. Her movements had become fluid, and she had dyed her hair a couple of shades darker, just enough to accentuate her fair skin and emphasize her eyes. How beautiful you've become. Ethan said sincerely, and you? I've been going places no decent person should go. I'll tell you about it someday, or even write a book. Later, his sister interrupted him. Tell me the most important thing. Did you come back for good? I mean back to a normal human life. You see, I need someone I can trust. No, Nancy, I'm sorry. He even put his hands out in front of him, like he wanted to protect himself from his sister's words. I can't. I wanted to see you. Just to be home. It's been a while, but you can't ask for more than that. I wish I could help you, but it's not my thing. Constancy, business, home, I'll only make things worse. I'll run away at the worst possible moment. Then what? But maybe you could at least think about it. Nancy suggested it. It's not like I'm suggesting you chain yourself to the office. We could find you something remotely, even something as simple as that, for starters. And then before you know it, you'll be up to your neck in business. He stopped his sister gently. It's not for everyone. Sis, people like you like it, but it doesn't suit me at all. No offense to me, but suit yourself. Nancy lowered her head with a sigh. I'm sorry, of course, but I suppose it's true. Everyone should do his own thing, what his soul is drawn to. You've grown up, sister. Ethan grinned. So have you. She answered him in the same tone. You haven't changed either. Have you been to see Clara? She's married, but I'm still doing what you asked me to do. She gets good alimony, and when your son gets older. Thank you, Nancy. Ethan meant what he said. He didn't come in. You don't need to bring anything up. She's doing well, and I'm glad of it. She's a wonderful person, very kind and sincere. Everyone would be happy to have such a wife. But not you. My sister smiled sadly. I am not suitable for Constancy. When it catches up with me, I get mad and start doing such a wild thing that I am ashamed of myself. Why should I ruin a good woman's life? Let alone my own child. Does she have a good husband? Yes, a very good husband. He's so protective of her and the baby. They're very happy, both Clara and Noah. I think in a couple of years they'll give Noah a brother or sister. Well, that's good. Ethan smiled. And now I'm going to go. It was good to see you by. Will you at least spend the night? My brother smiled nonchalantly. I'm not used to sleeping indoors unless the weather's really bad, and then I get nervous. But today it's warm. It felt good to be out on the city streets at night. Not that Ethan was looking for trouble, but somehow he was lucky. Or maybe it was just that it was peaceful at home compared to the tropical paradise. He'd never once run into a mugger, never had to deal with hooligans looking for someone to beat up. You could say the city at night was favorable to him. The streets were bright with streetlights, storefronts, and car headlights. He liked to sit on a bench and look at the road, cars passing by, everything like in life. Everyone goes his own way, and someone will get to the goal safely, and someone because of daredevillery will get into an accident, but will get off only a fright. And some, I didn't want to think about them. Ethan had become a surprisingly friendly man. I guess his life as a homeless man, his new life, had something to do with it. While he was rich, few people treated him kindly, only his colleagues in the racket, and those were gone as soon as he was a pauper. But now he was helped not to die by strangers, whom he knew had only enough. But kind grandmother's traders sometimes treated him with apples from their stalls. The cook at the street kiosk once took a long look at Ethan squatting on the curb with his alms bowl, then beckoned him over and gave him a huge, freshly cooked shawarma. And that man in the entryway who wouldn't let the scandalized neighbors kick out in the rain, a vagrant. These are such rays of kindness in a cruel world. You look at it and you become kinder yourself. And even his seemingly bitchy sister. How happy she was to see his brother. How she persuaded him to stay and return to civilized life, to settle down. But she didn't succeed. Ethan had become too attached to freedom. And freedom he now understood as the complete absence of attachments to addresses, cities, people. Ethan would be howling with longing in a week if he were to go back to his old self. And no money was worth it, no money ever. Today he found a good spot right across the street from the restaurant. People come out of there nice because they're full, and if they're drunk, the catch could be great. True, they were often chased away from fish places, but if you don't worry and try to be inconspicuous, you might get lucky. Without any nostalgia, he looked at the huge, brightly lighted windows and polished steps at the entrance. Was it really only a year ago that he himself had been in places like this every day? Waiters in uniform with polite smiles now seemed to him creatures from another world, and not so long ago he considered them idlers, unworthy of any attention, servants. How are things changing? A few more coins fell into his coin bowl. Ethan raised his head. "Thank you, Ethan." The young woman who had just dropped the change into his piggy bank squatted down and looked straight into the tramp's face. Ethan instinctively pulled back, hiding deeper into his hood. His hair had grown long enough to cover his face, along with his beard. He wouldn't recognize him. He wouldn't even recognize himself now. He couldn't see his old self, no matter how hard he tried. But she did, didn't she? "Ethan? Is that you, Ethan?" Clara kept repeating his name, but he didn't want to respond to it. He hadn't been Ethan for a long time, at least not the Ethan she knew. "You're wrong, girl," he said hoarsely. "That's not my name." "I'm sorry." Clara straightened up and took out a few bills from her purse. "Here you go, please. And sorry again. I thought you reminded me of someone I know." "I'm sorry." He nodded without raising his head. "Clara," someone called out to her. Ethan squinted his eyes. A young man was standing beside a brand new car, opening the doors for his beloved. "I'm coming," she smiled. Her heels clicked on the pavement. The smell of perfume wafted away. She had gone far away, and there was no need to catch up with her. Ethan took some paper money from his piggy bank and hid it under his sweatshirt. Thank you, Clara. Tonight he would have food and maybe even a little beer. What more could a free man dream of?